When Jacob Miller handed his last $18 to a desperate stranger at a midnight bus stop, he had no idea he was giving money to one of the most powerful women in America. Hungry, jobless, and terrified for his 7-year-old daughter waiting at home, Jacob chose compassion over survival. 24 hours later, 5 black SUVs would line his street, and that same woman, now revealed as billionaire CEO Charlotte Lancaster, would offer him something impossible: a chance to save her empire, expose a massive betrayal, and discover that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can rewrite your entire destiny. Before we dive into Jacob's incredible journey, please hit that like button and comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The fluorescent lights of Save More Grocery buzzed with the particular frequency of despair. Jacob Miller stood in the manager's cramped office, his work vest still on, name tag slightly crooked, watching his entire world collapse in real time. "I don't understand," Jacob said, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. "I've worked here for 3 years. I've never been late, never called in sick." "The cameras don't lie, Jacob." District Manager Paul Hendricks sat behind the desk like a judge delivering a death sentence, his expression a practiced mask of regret that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Last Tuesday, Register 4 was short, $217. You were the only cashier on that register during the discrepancy window." "But I didn't take anything." Jacob's hands clenched at his sides. "Paul, you know me. I have a daughter. I would never—" "The decision's been made." Paul slid a manila envelope across the desk. "Your final paycheck minus the shortage. We're being generous, not pressing charges." Jacob stared at the envelope like it was a snake. Inside would be maybe $200, his last paycheck, decimated by an accusation he couldn't fight. "This is everything I have. Grace needs school supplies. Her soccer fees are due. Should have thought about that before." Paul stood, effectively ending the conversation. "Security will escort you out." The walk through the store felt like a perp walk. Jacob had rung up groceries for half these people. Mrs. Chen with her weekly produce haul, the Johnson family with their Saturday morning donut tradition, old Mr. Peterson who always paid an exact change. Now they watched him leave between 2 security guards, and Jacob could see the judgment in their eyes. Thief. Liar. Failure. The November air hit him like a slap. 6:30 p.m., and the sky was already dark, pressing down on Philadelphia with the weight of approaching winter. Jacob stood in the parking lot, still wearing his vest, because the security guards hadn't even given him time to return it properly, and felt the full magnitude of his situation settle onto his shoulders. Rent was due in 4 days. Grace's medication cost $60 every 2 weeks. They were down to cereal and pasta at home, and now he had maybe $200 and no job. His phone buzzed, a text from his neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. "Grace is fine, fed her dinner, stay as long as you need." Jacob closed his eyes. Mrs. Rodriguez was 73 and watched Grace after school for $20 a week, money he could no longer afford to pay her. Grace, his 7-year-old miracle, who still believed her daddy could fix anything, who drew pictures of superheroes that looked suspiciously like him, who asked for so little because she somehow understood they had so little to give. His daughter deserved better than this. Better than a father who got fired for something he didn't do, who couldn't prove his innocence, who was about to fail at the only job that mattered, keeping her safe, fed, and believing the world was good. Jacob started walking. The bus fare was $2.50 each way, and he needed to save every dollar now. The walk home was 4 miles, but 4 miles times $2.50 was $5, and $5 was 2 boxes of pasta and a jar of sauce. This was his math now. This was his life. The city changed as he walked. The commercial district near Save More gave way to industrial blocks, then to the kind of neighborhood where people didn't make eye contact after dark. Jacob kept his head down, hands in his jacket pockets, trying to be invisible. His phone rang. Unknown number. Probably a debt collector. He'd been dodging those for weeks. He let it go to voicemail. The temperature was dropping. Jacob could see his breath, and his jacket, the same one he'd worn for 3 winters, wasn't quite enough anymore. He thought about Grace's winter coat, the one from the donation center that was slightly too big. She'd grow into it, she'd said with her gap-toothed smile. She was always so understanding, so patient. 7 years old and already learning to expect less. want less, need less. It made Jacob's chest ache. He passed a diner and the smell of coffee and grilled food nearly brought him to his knees. He hadn't eaten since the peanut butter sandwich he'd split with Grace that morning. His stomach cramped with hunger, but he kept walking. Couldn't spend money on himself, not now, not when every dollar was the difference between making rent and being homeless with a 7-year-old daughter. The streets grew quieter. Jacob passed closed storefronts with metal gates, parking lots with more broken glass than cars, apartment buildings with windows covered in cardboard and hope. This was the Philadelphia nobody put in the tourism brochures. The Philadelphia of people who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't make rent, who made impossible choices every single day, who understood that the system wasn't broken because it had never been built to work for them in the first place. Jacob's phone buzzed again. Another text from Mrs. Rodriguez. She drew you a picture. Wants to show you. Come home when you can. He could picture it. Grace at Mrs. Rodriguez's kitchen table, tongue sticking out in concentration, crayons scattered everywhere, creating something beautiful because that's what she did. She found beauty in everything, even when their life had none to spare. Jacob stopped at a corner, waiting for the light to change, even though no cars were coming. Old habits. Following rules. Being good. And where had that gotten him? A bus stop shelter stood on the corner, one of those enclosed ones with plastic walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sick. Someone had scratched "Hope dies here" into the plastic. Optimistic. Jacob was about to keep walking when he noticed her. A woman sat on the bench inside the shelter, and even from outside Jacob could see she was in trouble. She was hunched over, wearing what looked like an expensive coat but with one arm torn, her hair disheveled, mascara streaked down her face. She was counting money, bills spread across her lap, and even from 10 feet away Jacob could hear her quiet, desperate crying. He should keep walking. He had his own problems, his own desperation. Getting involved with strangers at night in this neighborhood was how people got hurt, got robbed, got worse. But Jacob had never been good at walking past suffering. He approached slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. "Excuse me, are you okay?" The woman's head snapped up, and Jacob saw real fear in her eyes. She was maybe 40, with the kind of face that was probably striking when not streaked with tears and terror. Her coat was definitely expensive. Wool, well-tailored, the kind of thing nobody in this neighborhood could afford. Her jewelry caught the light. Real gold, real diamonds. "Please," she said, her voice hoarse. "I don't have anything else. They took my phone, my bag, my cards." "I'm not trying to rob you," Jacob said gently, keeping his distance. "I'm just—" "You looked like you might need help." She laughed, a broken sound. "Help? Yes, I need help. I need a phone. I need to call someone. I need to get out of this nightmare." "What happened?" She looked at him for a long moment, clearly calculating risk. Then something in her seemed to break. "I was at a charity function downtown. Stepped outside for air. Someone grabbed me, took everything, phone, bag, ID, threw me out of a car about 6 blocks from here. I've been walking for an hour trying to find, I don't even know, a police station, a phone, something." Jacob processed this. Her story was either true, which meant she was genuinely in danger, or it was an elaborate setup for something worse. But the tear tracks looked real. The fear looked real. "There's a police station about 10 blocks east," he said, "but that's not a great walk this time of night." "I don't have a choice." She looked down at the money in her lap. "I found $23 in my coat pocket. I was trying to figure out if I have enough for a cab, but I don't even know where I'd tell them to go. I can't remember my assistant's number. I can't remember anyone's number. They're all in my phone." Her voice cracked. "I can't remember anyone's number." Jacob understood that kind of despair. That moment when you realize the systems you depend on have failed, and you're utterly, completely alone. "The bus runs until midnight," he heard himself say. "Route 47 goes right past the police station. Fare is $2.50. I have $23. She looked at the crumpled bills like they were a life raft. "That's enough. That's—" She stopped, doing math in her head. "What about you? Where are you going?" "Home. It's walkable." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. Saw his Save More vest, his worn jacket, his second-hand shoes. Saw someone who probably shouldn't be offering bus fare to strangers. How far is walkable? Couple miles. It's freezing. Jacob shrugged. I'll be fine. She stared at him, and something shifted in her expression. You're lying. You need the bus too. I'm good at walking. No? She stood up, suddenly fierce. No, I am not taking someone's bus fare. I am not that person. I'll walk to the police station. I'll be fine. You won't. Jacob kept his voice gentle. This neighborhood, this time of night, looking like you do, you won't make it 3 blocks. Please, take the bus. I have money. You have $23 and no ID. That's not going to get you a cab in this part of town. Please, just take the bus. She was crying again, silently, and Jacob recognized it. The tears of someone who'd hit bottom and found the fall still wasn't over. The bus appeared in the distance, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Jacob made a decision that he knew was stupid, reckless, and completely necessary. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. Inside was everything Paul had given him, $217, minus what Jacob had already spent on Grace's medication that morning. $118. All the money he had in the world until he found another job. He pulled out a 20. Wait, he said as the bus approached. Here. She looked at the bill like he was offering her a grenade. No, absolutely not. You need more than bus fare. You need to eat something. You need to call someone once you get somewhere safe. Take it. I can't. The bus was pulling up to the stop. Please, Jacob said. My daughter would want me to help. Let me help. Something in that statement, the mention of his daughter, broke through her resistance. She took the 20, then grabbed his hand. What's your name? Jacob Miller. Jacob Miller. She said it like she was memorizing it. I won't forget this. I promise you, I will not forget this. The bus doors opened. She climbed on, still clutching the money, and turned back to look at Jacob one more time. Thank you, she mouthed through the glass. Then the bus pulled away, and Jacob was alone in the cold and the dark with $98 to his name and 4 miles to walk home. He started walking. Stupid. That's what he'd just been, monumentally stupid. He'd given $20 to a complete stranger when his own daughter needed school supplies, when rent was due, when he had no job and no prospects and no margin for stupidity. But Grace would have wanted him to help. Grace, who gave half her Halloween candy to the kids who didn't get to trick or treat, who shared her lunch with the boy who always forgot his, who believed with her whole heart that people were fundamentally good. Jacob refused to teach her differently. Even when the world proved him wrong, even when he lost his job for something he didn't do, even when he had $98 and no plan, he refused to teach his daughter that kindness was a luxury they couldn't afford. The walk home took 90 minutes. By the time Jacob climbed the stairs to their third-floor apartment, his legs ached, his stomach was eating itself, and his hands were numb from the cold. Mrs. Rodriguez's door opened before he could knock. Mija, you look terrible, she said, pulling him inside. Grace is asleep on my couch. Wouldn't go to bed until you got home. I'm sorry, Mrs. Rodriguez. I'll get her. Sit, eat. She pushed him toward her kitchen table where a plate covered in foil waited. I made extra. Don't argue with me. Jacob sat because he didn't have the strength to argue. Under the foil was rice and beans and chicken, still warm, and the smell alone nearly made him cry. What happened? Mrs. Rodriguez asked, sitting across from him. You're walking home at 9 p.m. You look like death, and Grace said you had to work late. Jacob told her. Not everything. He didn't mention the woman at the bus stop. But enough. Lost his job. False accusation. No money. Mrs. Rodriguez listened with the patience of someone who'd seen this story before, lived this story before, and knew exactly how it ended. Grace doesn't know? She asked when he finished. Not yet. I'll tell her tomorrow. Don't lie to her. I won't. I'll just figure out how to say it. How to tell her things are going to get harder without making her afraid. Mrs. Rodriguez reached across the table and took his hand. Jacob Miller, you are a good father. Grace knows this. Whatever happens, she knows this. I gave $20 to a stranger tonight, Jacob said suddenly. I had $118. and I gave 20 to someone I'll never see again. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Maybe because it was the stupidest thing I've ever done, or maybe because it was the only good thing in a really bad day. Was she in trouble? Yes. Did you help her? I think so. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. Then it wasn't stupid. Eat your dinner. Jacob ate. The food was warm and good, and with every bite he felt a little more human. Mrs. Rodriguez watched him with the expression of someone who understood hunger, not just for food, but for dignity, for hope, for the simple belief that tomorrow might be better. When he finished, she packed up the leftovers in a container. For Grace's breakfast. Mrs. Rodriguez, I can't pay you for watching her this week. Did I ask for money? No, but then we don't talk about money. Grace is a good girl. She helps me. I help her. That's what neighbors do. Jacob felt tears burning behind his eyes. Thank you. He carried Grace home, his sleeping daughter in his arms, her head against his shoulder. She didn't wake up, even when he changed her into pajamas and tucked her into bed. He sat on the edge of her mattress. They shared a one-bedroom apartment. Grace got the bedroom. Jacob slept on the couch and watched her sleep. She'd drawn him a picture. It was on her little desk, held down by a rock she'd painted. The drawing showed two figures, a tall one and a short one, holding hands under a sun. She'd labeled them Daddy and Me. At the bottom, in her careful 7-year-old handwriting, we are a team. Team. She'd meant team. Jacob held the picture and let himself cry, silently in the darkness of his daughter's room. He cried for the job he'd lost, for the injustice he couldn't fight, for the fear that he wouldn't be enough, do enough, provide enough. He cried because he was tired and scared and out of options, but mostly he cried because Grace believed they were a team, and he was terrified of letting her down. Eventually, he kissed her forehead and went to his couch. He set his phone alarm for 6 a.m., early enough to start job hunting before Grace woke up, and pulled his thin blanket over himself. Sleep didn't come easily. Jacob lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the building, pipes rattling, neighbors arguing, sirens in the distance, and tried to make a plan. He had $98. Rent was $800, due in 4 days. Even if he found a job tomorrow, he wouldn't see a paycheck for 2 weeks. They were going to lose the apartment. The thought sat in his chest like a stone. Grace would be homeless. She'd have to leave her school, her friends, her little bedroom with the painted rock and the drawings on the walls. She'd learned that her father couldn't protect her from the world's cruelty. Unless he could find something fast. Construction work, day labor, anything that paid cash. He'd work 3 jobs, 4 jobs, whatever it took. He'd figure this out. He had to. Jacob finally fell asleep around midnight, exhausted and afraid, with no idea that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. At 6 a.m., his alarm went off. Jacob hauled himself off the couch, made instant coffee with grounds he'd reused twice already, and opened his laptop, a 5-year-old machine that took 3 minutes to boot up. He spent 2 hours applying for jobs. Grocery stores, warehouses, delivery services, anything that would hire someone quickly. Most applications vanished into the digital void. A few generated automated responses. Thank you for your interest. Grace woke up at 8, padding into the living room in her pajamas, her hair a tangled mess. Daddy! She crashed into him with the full force of 7-year-old affection. You're home! Hey, monkey. He pulled her into his lap. Sorry I was late last night. Mrs. Rodriguez said you were working hard. Grace snuggled against him. I drew you a picture. I saw it. We are definitely a team. The best team. She looked up at him with eyes that trusted him completely. Can we have pancakes? They didn't have ingredients for pancakes. They had cereal and the rice and beans Mrs. Rodriguez had sent home. How about we save pancakes for the weekend? Jacob suggested. Make them extra special. Okay. Grace accepted this without question, without disappointment, and Jacob's heart cracked a little more. They ate cereal, the cheap store brand that turned the milk gray, and Grace chattered about school, about her friend Emma, who had a cat, about how she was going to score a goal in Saturday's soccer game for sure this time. Jacob listened and responded and didn't tell her that he'd lost his job, that they might not have money for soccer anymore, that everything was falling apart, Not yet. Let her have one more morning of believing the world was safe. At 9 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Jacob's first thought was the landlord come early to hassle him about rent. He opened the door, prepared to ask for an extension, to beg if necessary. 5 people stood in the hallway. 4 were wearing dark suits and earpieces, professional, alert, unmistakably security. The 5th was a woman in a tailored business suit, her hair pulled back, her expression composed and powerful. It took Jacob 3 full seconds to recognize her, the woman from the bus stop. But she didn't look desperate now. She looked like she owned the building. Hell, she looked like she owned the city. "Hello, Jacob," she said, and her voice was steady, confident, completely different from the broken woman who'd cried over $23 last night. "We need to talk." Grace appeared behind Jacob, peeking around his leg. "Daddy? Who's that?" The woman's expression softened. "You must be Grace. Your father told me about you." "He did?" Grace looked up at Jacob, confused. Jacob was too stunned to speak. His mind raced through possibilities. Was this a setup? Had he helped someone involved in something criminal? Were these cops? "Mr. Miller," one of the security team spoke, "Ms. Lancaster would like a few minutes of your time. If you're comfortable, we can speak inside, or we can arrange a more private location." Lancaster, that name meant something, tickled at the edge of Jacob's memory. "I don't understand," Jacob managed. The woman, Lancaster, smiled, and it transformed her face. "Last night, you gave me $20 when you probably couldn't afford to give me 20 cents. You put me on a bus when you needed that bus yourself. You helped a stranger when you had every reason to keep walking." She paused. "I told you I wouldn't forget. I meant it." "I still don't." "My name is Charlotte Lancaster. I'm the CEO of Lancaster & Associates. We're a venture capital firm managing approximately $4 billion in assets across technology, real estate, and emerging markets." She said it matter-of-factly, like she was commenting on the weather. "Last night, I was robbed and assaulted after a charity event. You helped me. Now, I'd like to help you." 4 billion. The words didn't even sound real. "This is some kind of joke," Jacob said. "I assure you it's not." Charlotte gestured to one of her security team, who handed her a folder. "I had my people look into you this morning. Jacob Alexander Miller, 29 years old, single father. Lost your job yesterday after being falsely accused of theft by a district manager covering for his own nephew, who's actually the one stealing from registers." She paused. "I know everything, Jacob, and I'd like to offer you a job." The hallway seemed to tilt. "A job? A job? Working directly for me. Starting salary $120,000 annually. Full benefits, including coverage for Grace's medical needs. I've reviewed your background. You're smart, detail-oriented, and most importantly, you have integrity. The kind of integrity I desperately need right now." Jacob couldn't process this. Yesterday, he'd lost everything. Today, a billionaire was offering him a 6-figure job in his hallway. "Why?" he asked. Charlotte's expression grew serious. "Because someone close to me has been stealing from my company. Someone I trusted, and I need someone I can trust to help me figure out who before they destroy everything I've built." "What?" She looked him dead in the eye. "Last night, you gave a stranger your last $20. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. So I'm asking, will you help me?" Grace tugged on Jacob's shirt. "Daddy, is the pretty lady offering you a job?" Yes, monkey." "You should say yes," Grace said confidently. "You're really good at jobs." Charlotte laughed, a real, genuine laugh. "Grace is absolutely right. So what do you say, Jacob? Do we have a deal?" Jacob looked at his daughter, who was smiling up at him with complete faith. He looked at Charlotte Lancaster, billionaire CEO, who'd tracked him down to repay a $20 kindness. He thought about the $98 in his wallet, the rent due in 4 days, the impossible math of survival. And he thought about how he'd told Grace they were a team. "Yes," Jacob heard himself say. "Yes, we have a deal." Charlotte smiled. "Excellent. My car is downstairs. We have a lot of work to do, and I need to brief you on everything. Grace, do you mind if I borrow your father for a few hours? Can I come?" Grace asked hopefully. Actually, Charlotte said thoughtfully, I think you should. I have a feeling your father is going to need all the moral support he can get today. An hour later, Jacob found himself in the back of a Mercedes, Grace beside him eating expensive pastries that Charlotte's assistant had somehow procured, while the city he'd walked through last night blurred past outside tinted windows. Charlotte sat across from them, tablet in hand, all business now. Here's the situation, she began. 3 months ago, I started noticing irregularities in our accounts, small at first, transactions that didn't quite add up, expenses that seemed inflated. I brought it to my CFO's attention, and he assured me it was just accounting adjustments. But it's gotten worse. We're talking about millions now. Millions? Jacob repeated. Someone is systematically embezzling from my company. They're good, covering their tracks, hiding transactions and legitimate expenses. My entire executive team has access to these accounts. I don't know who I can trust anymore. And you think I can help with that? Charlotte leaned forward. You worked retail for 3 years. You understand inventory, cash handling, how people steal and how they hide it. More than that, you understand how people think when they're desperate. I need that perspective. I need someone who can look at this from the ground level, not from a corner office. I'm not an investigator. No, but you're honest. And right now, that's rarer and more valuable than any credential. She pulled up a spreadsheet on her tablet. This is our expense report from the last quarter. I need you to look at it, really look at it, and tell me what seems wrong. Jacob took the tablet hesitantly. Numbers filled the screen, neat rows of corporate spending. He'd never analyzed anything like this before, but Charlotte was right. He understood how people stole. At SaveMore, the district manager's nephew had stolen by ringing up fake returns and pocketing the cash. Small amounts, spread across multiple registers, hidden in the normal flow of business. Jacob had watched it happen and said nothing because he needed his job, and by the time he'd worked up the courage to report it, the nephew had blamed him instead. He looked at the spreadsheet with that memory in mind. Here, he said after a few minutes, pointing to a line item. This conference expense, $300,000 for a 2-day event in Miami. That seems high. The venue was expensive, Charlotte said. Luxury hotel, full catering. But look at the itemized breakdown. Jacob scrolled down. $10,000 for audiovisual equipment rental. That's insane. You could buy the equipment for that price. And here, $15,000 for additional security. Why would you need additional security beyond the hotels? Charlotte took the tablet back, studying the numbers with new eyes. You're right, these are inflated, significantly. Someone's padding expenses and pocketing the difference, Jacob said. It's the oldest trick in the book. Grace, who'd been quietly eating pastries, suddenly spoke up. Like when Tyler says he needs $5 for lunch, but lunch only costs $3? Jacob smiled at his daughter. Exactly like that, monkey. Charlotte was staring at the spreadsheet, her expression hardening. The conference was organized by my executive assistant, Derek. He's been with me for 5 years. I trust him completely. Maybe you shouldn't, Jacob said quietly. The rest of the ride was spent with Charlotte making phone calls, Jacob poring over financial documents that made his head spin, and Grace contentedly watching the city from the window, occasionally announcing when she saw something cool. They arrived at a gleaming glass tower in downtown Philadelphia. Lancaster and Associates occupied the top 5 floors, and as they rode the elevator up, Jacob watched the city spread out below them through the glass walls. This was a view he'd never imagined seeing, a world he'd only glimpsed from the outside. Grace pressed her face against the glass. Daddy, we're so high up. I know, monkey. Pretty cool, right? The best. Charlotte's office was stunning. Corner suite, floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that probably cost more than Jacob's annual salary at SaveMore. But Charlotte didn't sit behind her massive desk. Instead, she directed them to a conference table where several people were already waiting. Everyone, this is Jacob Miller. He's going to be helping us with the investigation. Jacob, this is my leadership team. Jacob shook hands with people whose titles he barely understood. Chief Financial Officer, Chief Operating Officer, Head of Legal, VP of Business Development. They all looked at him with barely concealed confusion. Who was this guy in a worn jacket? Why was there a 7-year-old in the room, and what qualified him to investigate their company? Only one person smiled warmly, a man in his late 30s with perfect hair and a perfect suit. Derek Chen, Charlotte's executive assistant. Welcome aboard, Jacob. Anything you need, you just let me know. Jacob shook his hand and felt an immediate instinctive dislike. Derek's smile was too practiced, too smooth, like the district manager who'd fired him, like every person who'd ever looked down on Jacob for not having the right education, the right clothes, the right pedigree. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Financial reports, expense accounts, audit trails. Jacob understood about half of it, but Charlotte kept pulling him into the conversation, asking his opinion, valuing his input in a way no boss ever had. Derek was helpful, almost too helpful, volunteering information, pulling up documents, offering explanations that sounded reasonable but felt slightly off, like a song played in the wrong key. Grace fell asleep in one of the leather chairs, curled up with her jacket as a blanket. When the meeting finally broke up, Charlotte asked Derek to stay behind. Derek, I need you to pull all the conference expenses for the last 2 years, complete itemized breakdowns. Of course. Derek's smile never wavered. Can I ask why? Just an audit, nothing to worry about. Whatever you need, Charlotte. Derek glanced at Jacob. This is about what he found, isn't it? The Miami conference expenses? Jacob met his eyes and saw something flicker there. Calculation, assessment, a predator recognizing potential threat. Just pull the reports, Derek, Charlotte said. When they were alone, Charlotte sank into her chair and rubbed her temples. He's been with me for 5 years. He knows everything about this company, has access to everything. If it's him, then he'll be hard to prove, Jacob finished. He'll have covered his tracks. He'll have explanations for everything. So how do we catch him? Jacob thought about the nephew at Savemore, about how he'd almost gotten away with it. People who steal always make the same mistake. They get comfortable. They start to believe they're smarter than everyone else. We don't go after the big expenses. Those are too visible, too easy to explain. We go after the small stuff, the pattern of small stuff. Charlotte looked at him with something like respect. You're better at this than I expected. I've been on both sides of this, Jacob admitted. The accused and the witness. I know how it works. They worked until 6 p.m., with Grace waking up around 4 and being absolutely delighted when Charlotte's assistant brought her hot chocolate and cookies. Jacob pored over financial documents, highlighting irregularities, tracking patterns, slowly building a picture of systematic theft. Derek came by 3 times, always with good reasons, always helpful, always watching. By the time Charlotte's driver took them home, in the Mercedes, because Charlotte insisted, Jacob had filled a notebook with notes and had a splitting headache from staring at numbers all day. Daddy, Grace said sleepily as they climbed the stairs to their apartment, is this your new job? I think so, monkey. Do you like it? Jacob thought about that, about spending the day solving a puzzle, being valued for his insight, working alongside someone who treated him as an equal instead of as expendable labor. Yeah, he said, I think I really do. Mrs. Rodriguez opened her door as they passed. There you are. I was getting worried. She stopped, taking in their appearance. What happened to you two? Mrs. Rodriguez, Grace announced proudly, Daddy has a new job. And we went to a building that was so tall, and I had hot chocolate and met a pretty lady who's really nice. Mrs. Rodriguez looked at Jacob with raised eyebrows. It's complicated, Jacob said, but good, really good. That night, after Grace was asleep, Jacob sat on his couch with his laptop and Googled Charlotte Lancaster. The results were overwhelming. Articles about her company's success, interviews in business magazines, photos from charity galas. She was exactly who she'd said she was, a billionaire CEO, one of the most powerful women in venture capital, and she'd hired him based on a $20 act of kindness. Jacob closed his laptop and looked at his daughter's drawing on the wall. Daddy and me, we are a team. For the first time in months, he let himself hope that things might actually be okay. He had no idea that the hardest part was still ahead, that Derek Chen was already 10 steps ahead of them, or that by the end of the week, Jacob would have to choose between his safety and doing what was right. But tonight, he let himself hope. And sometimes, hope was enough to keep going. The morning sun cut through the office windows like a promise and a warning. Jacob arrived at Lancaster and Associates at 7 a.m., Grace's hand in his, both of them still adjusting to this surreal new reality. 3 days into his new job, and Jacob still expected someone to tell him it was all a mistake, that he didn't belong in this world of glass towers and six-figure salaries. Charlotte was already at her desk when they arrived, surrounded by documents, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail that suggested she'd been there for hours. "Jacob, good. Come look at this." She didn't waste time on pleasantries, just gestured him over to her computer screen. Grace settled into what had become her chair, with a coloring book Charlotte's assistant had thoughtfully provided. Jacob studied the screen. Bank statements, transfer records, a web of transactions that made his head spin. "Derek gave me the conference records like I asked," Charlotte said, her voice tight. "Everything looks perfect. Too perfect. Every receipt accounted for, every expense justified. But I've been going through our bank statements for the last 3 years, and look at this pattern." She highlighted a series of small transfers, 5,000 here, 8,000 there, never more than 10,000 at a time. Every month, right after our major accounts payable run, there are these transfers to an LLC I've never heard of. Cascade Consulting Services. They're listed as IT support and infrastructure maintenance. "Do you have an IT support contract with them?" Jacob asked. "According to Derek, yes. He set it up 2 years ago. Says they handle our server maintenance and cybersecurity updates." "Have you ever met anyone from this company?" Charlotte's expression darkened. "No. And when I tried to call the number on file this morning, it's disconnected." Jacob felt that familiar twist in his gut, the same feeling he'd had watching the district manager's nephew at SaveMore, knowing something was wrong but not yet seeing the full picture. "It's a shell company," he said. "Derek created it, probably has a business bank account in the company's name, transfers money there, and then moves it to his personal accounts. That's over $2 million over 3 years." Charlotte's hands were shaking. $2 million, and I never noticed. What kind of CEO doesn't notice $2 million disappearing? "The kind with $4 billion in assets and hundreds of transactions every day," Jacob said gently. "He hid it in the noise. That's what makes him smart." "Smart? He stole from me for 3 years, and you're calling him smart." "I'm calling him predictable." Jacob pulled up a chair. "People who steal always follow patterns. They can't help it. Once they find something that works, they repeat it. We just need to find the pattern and prove it leads back to him." "How?" Jacob thought about it. Back at SaveMore, he'd figured out the nephew's scam by tracking the timing. Fake returns always happened during shift changes when multiple cashiers were transitioning, making it harder to pin down who'd processed what. Derek would have similar tells. "When did you hire Derek?" he asked. 5 years ago. He came highly recommended from another firm. Started as a junior assistant, worked his way up. I promoted him to executive assistant 3 years ago." "Right when these transfers started," Jacob noted. "What changed 3 years ago? What new access did he get with the promotion?" Charlotte pulled up Derek's employment file. "Full access to our financial systems. Authority to approve expenses under $50,000 without my signature. He basically runs the day-to-day operations." "There's your opportunity." He got access and saw a chance. Jacob studied the transfer dates. "These always happen on Fridays, right after 5 p.m., when most people have left for the weekend. By Monday, it's buried in a week's worth of transactions." "So we have motive, means, and opportunity," Charlotte said, "but no proof that Derek specifically created this shell company or authorized these transfers. Then we need to catch him doing it." Charlotte looked at him sharply. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that people who've gotten away with something for 3 years get comfortable, confident. We give him an opportunity to steal again, but this time we're watching. That's entrapment. It's business." Jacob surprised himself with his own boldness. "We create a fake expense, something big enough to be worth his attention, small enough that it won't raise immediate red flags. We see if he takes the bait." Charlotte studied him for a long moment. "You've really thought about this, haven't you?" "I've had a lot of time to think about how people steal and how they get caught. Or don't get caught." Jacob's voice grew quiet. "The guy who framed me at SaveMore got away with it because nobody thought someone in a position of trust would steal. Everyone assumed it had to be the cashier with the worn-out shoes. Derek's counting on the same thing, that you'll never suspect him because he's been loyal, because he's your right hand. Was loyal, Charlotte corrected bitterly. Past tense. The office door opened, and Derek himself walked in carrying coffee and a folder. His smile was warm, professional, completely genuine looking. Good morning, Charlotte. Jacob. He set the coffee down on Charlotte's desk. Her usual order, Jacob noticed, prepared without asking. I have those additional IT contracts you requested. Everything's in order, all vendors properly vetted. Thank you, Derek. Charlotte's voice was steady, giving nothing away. I appreciate your thoroughness. Of course. Anything else you need? Derek's eyes flicked to the computer screen, but Charlotte had already minimized the bank statements. Actually, yes. Jacob and I are working on a proposal for a new client. We'll need a comprehensive budget analysis, infrastructure costs, implementation timeline, the usual. Can you have that ready by Friday? Absolutely. What's the client? Still confidential, Charlotte said smoothly. I'll send you the specifics this afternoon. Perfect. I'll get started as soon as you do. Derek glanced at Grace, who was concentrating intensely on coloring a unicorn. Someone's artistic this morning. That's a unicorn named Sparkle, Grace announced without looking up. She can fly and also shoot rainbows from her horn. Derek laughed. Sounds like a very important unicorn. Well, I'll leave you all to your morning. Charlotte, you have a 10 a.m. with the board and lunch with the mayor at noon. Thank you, Derek. Charlotte waited until he'd left before exhaling slowly. He has no idea he's acting completely normal. Because in his mind, he's already won, Jacob said. He's been doing this for 3 years without getting caught. He thinks he's untouchable. So what's this fake proposal you're thinking of? Jacob pulled out his notebook, where he'd been sketching ideas at 3 a.m. when he couldn't sleep. We create a proposal for a major infrastructure upgrade, something that would realistically cost around $500,000, but that Derek could easily inflate to $750,000. We have him prepare the budget analysis, approve the vendors, including a shell company he creates to capture part of the expense. But we don't actually spend the money. Right. We watch to see if he sets up the scam. If he does, we have him actively attempting to commit fraud. That's not entrapment. That's catching someone in the act. Charlotte was quiet for a moment, then reached for her phone. I need to call my lawyer. If we're going to do this, we need to do it right. I want Derek prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. While Charlotte made calls, Jacob worked with Grace on her unicorn. His daughter had adapted to his new job with the easy acceptance of childhood, treating the corner office like an extension of their living room. She'd charmed everyone on the executive floor, from the intimidating CFO, who turned out to have grandkids Grace's age, to the security team who let her press the elevator buttons. Daddy, Grace said, carefully coloring inside the lines. Is Derek a bad guy? Jacob looked at his daughter, surprised. Why do you ask that? I don't know. He smiles a lot, but his eyes don't smile, like Mr. Henderson at the store. Mr. Henderson, the district manager who'd fired Jacob. Grace had met him once, at the company picnic Jacob had taken her to, and she'd hidden behind Jacob's legs the whole time. Kids had instincts about people that adults learn to ignore. Derek might have done some bad things, Jacob said carefully. But we're trying to figure out the truth first. That's important. Making sure we know what really happened before we decide someone's guilty. Like how they said you stole but you didn't. Exactly like that. Grace nodded solemnly and went back to her unicorn. Okay, but I still don't like his smile. Charlotte hung up the phone, her expression determined. Legal says we're clear to proceed. They'll document everything, make sure we have an airtight case. Jacob, are you sure about this? If Derek figures out what we're doing, he won't, Jacob said with more confidence than he felt. He spent 3 years thinking he's smarter than everyone else. That's his weakness. All right then. Charlotte opened her laptop. Let's catch a thief. The trap was set that afternoon. Charlotte sent Derek a detailed memo about a fictitious infrastructure upgrade, new servers, enhanced security systems, upgraded software across all departments. Total estimated cost, $500,000, but with room for Derek to pad expenses and recommend additional vendors. Derek's response came within an hour, professionally enthusiastic. This is exactly what we need. Let me reach out to our usual vendors and get some quotes. I know a few companies that specialize in this kind of implementation. Very reliable, very professional. I'm sure you do, Charlotte muttered, showing Jacob the email. Over the next 3 days, Derek worked his magic. He produced vendor quotes, implementation timelines, cost-benefit analyses. Everything looked legitimate, professional, comprehensive. The total cost had somehow climbed to $750,000, exactly as Jacob had predicted. One of the vendors Derek recommended was called Summit Solutions Group, an IT consulting firm that, according to Derek's memo, specialized in enterprise infrastructure upgrades. Jacob spent an evening researching Summit Solutions Group while Grace did homework at the kitchen table. The company had a website, a business address, even a LinkedIn page with employee profiles. It looked completely legitimate. But when Jacob dug deeper, checking the business registration, looking at the address on Google Street View, cross-referencing the employee names, the facade started to crack. The business address was a UPS store mailbox. The employees' LinkedIn profiles had been created within the last month. The company registration dated back only 6 weeks. Derek had created an entire fake company to steal from Charlotte. "Daddy, you look mad," Grace observed, looking up from her math worksheet. "Just frustrated, monkey." "With Derek?" "Yeah, with Derek. Told you his eyes didn't smile." Grace returned to her math with the satisfaction of being proven right. Jacob called Charlotte. "I've got him. Summit Solutions is fake. Everything. The website, the employees, all of it. Derek created this company specifically for this proposal." "How fast?" 6 weeks ago. Right after you announced we were exploring infrastructure upgrades at the quarterly meeting." Charlotte's laugh was sharp. "He's been planning this for weeks. Probably thought it was going to be his biggest score yet." "We need to move before he realizes we're onto him," Jacob said. "If we approve this proposal and he actually tries to transfer money, then we have him on attempted fraud," Charlotte finished. "Jacob, I'm approving the proposal tomorrow. Derek will set up the transfers and we'll have law enforcement ready to move. This ends this week." That night, Jacob couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Derek, about how someone could work beside another person for 5 years, earn their trust, and steal from them every single day. He thought about his own situation at SaveMore, how easily he'd been framed, how powerless he'd felt watching someone else's crime destroy his life. This time would be different. This time, the guilty person would face consequences. Friday morning arrived with the weight of endings and beginnings. Charlotte called an executive meeting at 9 a.m., ostensibly to approve the infrastructure proposal. Derek arrived early, polished and professional, carrying his usual folder of documents. The conference room filled with senior staff. CFO, COO, legal counsel, and 2 people Jacob didn't recognize, introduced as external auditors Charlotte had brought in for the approval process. Derek's confidence never wavered as he presented the proposal. He walked through vendor quotes, implementation phases, cost breakdowns. It was masterful, really, a complete fiction presented with absolute conviction. "And Summit Solutions Group will handle the core infrastructure upgrade," Derek explained, clicking through his presentation. "They're industry leaders in this space, with extensive experience in firms our size. Their quote of $300,000 is competitive for the scope of work." "Have we worked with Summit Solutions before?" the CFO asked. "Not directly, but they come highly recommended. I've personally vetted them, toured their facilities, met with their leadership team, reviewed their client portfolio." All lies. Every word delivered with Derek's trademark confidence. Charlotte leaned forward. "Derek, can you provide the business registration for Summit Solutions? Just for our records." "Of course." Derek didn't even hesitate. "I'll have that to you by end of day." "Actually, I have it here." Charlotte slid a document across the table. "Interesting registration date, 6 weeks ago, right after our quarterly meeting where I mentioned exploring infrastructure upgrades." The room went very quiet. Derek glanced at the document, and Jacob watched his face carefully. The smile didn't fade, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, recalibration. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Charlotte." "I'm implying that Summit Solutions Group doesn't exist. It's a shell company created specifically to funnel money from this proposal. Just like Cascade Consulting Services, which has been siphoning $2 million from our accounts over the past 3 years. Derek's laugh was smooth, practiced. Charlotte, I don't know what's happened, but there's clearly been some kind of misunderstanding. Summit Solutions is absolutely legitimate. Then explain why their business address is a UPS store mailbox, Jacob said quietly. Explain why every employee profile was created in the last month. Explain why when I called their supposed main office, I reached a virtual answering service. Derek's eyes locked onto Jacob, and the mask finally slipped. The smile faded. What replaced it was cold, calculating rage. You. Derek's voice was soft, dangerous. This is because of you. Charlotte, this man has been here less than a week. He's a grocery store cashier fired for theft, and you're taking his word over mine? Jacob was framed, Charlotte said evenly, just like you tried to frame this company. The difference is, we have proof. One of the auditors, actually a detective with the Philadelphia Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, stood up and showed his badge. Derek Chen, you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent. What happened next happened fast. Derek bolted for the door, but two uniformed officers who'd been waiting in the hallway blocked his exit. He spun back toward Charlotte, his face twisted with fury. You have no idea what you've done, he hissed. I made this company. I'm the one who kept everything running while you played billionaire philanthropist. You'd have nothing without me. I have exactly what I built, Charlotte said coldly. You stole from me, Derek. For 3 years you stole from me, and you thought you'd never get caught. I wouldn't have if you hadn't brought in this nobody, Derek pointed at Jacob. Some pathetic single dad you picked up off the street because he gave you bus fare. You threw away 5 years of loyalty for him. No, Charlotte corrected. I chose integrity over theft. There's a difference. They cuffed Derek and led him away, still protesting, still insisting he'd been framed, that this was a mistake. His voice echoed down the hallway until the elevator doors cut it off. The conference room sat in stunned silence. Finally, the CFO spoke. Did we all just watch that happen? We did, Charlotte said wearily, and now we have a lot of work to do. Derek had access to everything. We need to audit every account, every contract, every vendor relationship. I want to know the full extent of what he took. The meeting dissolved into crisis management mode. Jacob sat quietly, processing what had just happened. A week ago, he'd been fired for something he didn't do. Today, he'd helped catch someone who actually deserved it. Grace appeared in the doorway. She'd been with Charlotte's assistant in the outer office, carefully kept away from the confrontation. Daddy, why are there police here? Just some business stuff, monkey. Jacob pulled her into a hug. Nothing to worry about. Did Derek do something bad? Yeah, he did something bad. I told you his eyes didn't smile. Grace sounded vindicated. Can we have pizza for dinner to celebrate being right? Jacob laughed despite everything. Yeah, monkey. We can have pizza. Charlotte came over looking exhausted but relieved. Jacob, can you stay? I need your help with the audit team. You understand his patterns better than anyone. Of course. The next several hours were a blur of documents, interviews, forensic accounting. The full picture emerged slowly, horrifyingly. Derek hadn't stolen $2 million. He'd stolen closer to $4 million over 3 years, using multiple shell companies, inflated expenses, and fake vendors. He'd been systematically bleeding the company, and he'd covered his tracks so well that without Jacob's insight, he might never have been caught. By 8 p.m., Grace was asleep in Charlotte's office, curled up on the couch. Jacob and Charlotte sat in the conference room, surrounded by evidence of Derek's betrayal. $4 million, Charlotte said numbly. He stole $4 million, and I never noticed. What does that say about me? It says you trusted someone, Jacob replied. That's not a character flaw. It feels like one right now. She rubbed her eyes. I keep thinking about all the times I trusted him with sensitive information, gave him more access, more responsibility. I handed him the keys to rob me. He was good at what he did. Professional criminals usually are. Charlotte looked at Jacob. You figured it out in 3 days. 3 days, and you saw what I missed for 3 years. I've been on the other side of this, Jacob said. I know what it feels like to be blamed for something you didn't do, to watch someone else's crime destroy your life. I wasn't going to let that happen to you. Because I gave you bus fare. Because you were kind when you didn't have to be. Because you saw me as a person worth helping. Jacob's voice grew quiet. Do you know what that meant? I just lost everything. I was walking home in the cold, trying to figure out how to tell my daughter we were going to lose our apartment, and you reminded me that kindness still existed in the world. Charlotte's eyes were bright with tears. I was terrified that night, completely terrified, and you helped me without hesitation, without wanting anything in return. That's rarer than you think. Maybe we both just got lucky. No. Charlotte shook her head. This wasn't luck. This was... She stopped, seeming to search for words. I don't believe in fate or destiny or any of that, but I believe in people. And I believe that sometimes the right person shows up at exactly the right moment. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the day settling over them. Finally, Charlotte spoke again. Jacob, I want you to stay on, not just to help clean up Derek's mess, but permanently. I need someone I can trust, someone who sees things clearly. I'm creating a new position, Director of Operations Integrity. It's yours if you want it. Charlotte, I'm not qualified. You caught a thief who'd been stealing from me for 3 years. You're qualified. She met his eyes. $150,000 annually, full benefits, and real authority to investigate anything that seems wrong. No more people like Derek slipping through the cracks. What do you say? Jacob thought about Save More, about counting pennies, about walking 4 miles in the cold. He thought about Grace drawing pictures of them as a team, about Mrs. Rodriguez's kindness, about how close they'd come to losing everything. Yes, he said. I say yes. Charlotte smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. Good, because I have a feeling we make a pretty good team. Grace stirred on the couch, mumbling in her sleep. Jacob went to check on her, pulling his jacket over her like a blanket. His daughter, who believed in unicorns and rainbows and daddies who could fix anything. Maybe she'd been right all along. Charlotte joined him, looking down at Grace with soft affection. She's wonderful, you know. You've done an amazing job raising her. I've done my best. It hasn't always been enough. It's always been enough, Charlotte said firmly. She's happy, healthy, loved. That's everything. They stood there for a moment, watching Grace sleep, and Jacob felt something shift. Something subtle, but profound. This wasn't just a job anymore. This wasn't just about survival. This was about building something, creating something, being part of something larger than himself. The city lights glittered outside the windows, and for the first time in years, Jacob felt like he belonged somewhere. His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Rodriguez. How did it go? Jacob typed back, better than I could have imagined. Her response came immediately. Told you. Good people find good people. Come by this weekend, I made tamales. Jacob smiled. His life had transformed in a week, from desperate and broke to secure and valued. But some things hadn't changed. Mrs. Rodriguez still made tamales. Grace still drew pictures. He still walked through the world trying to do the right thing. Maybe that's all that had ever mattered anyway. Charlotte's phone rang. Her lawyer with updates on Derek's arrest and the charges being filed. She stepped away to take the call, and Jacob sat down next to his sleeping daughter. We did it, monkey, he whispered. We're going to be okay. Grace smiled in her sleep, peaceful and content. Outside, the city hummed with life. Millions of people, each with their own struggles, their own triumphs, their own moments of choosing kindness over indifference. Somewhere out there, someone else was having the worst day of their life. Somewhere else, someone was experiencing unexpected grace. Jacob understood now that these things were connected, that every act of compassion rippled outward, that every choice to help instead of walk away mattered more than anyone realized. He'd given Charlotte $20 when he couldn't afford to give 20 cents. She'd given him a chance when he had nothing left. And together, they'd proven that integrity wasn't weakness, that trust wasn't naive, that sometimes the people who'd been knocked down were exactly the ones who knew how to stand back up and fight. The night stretched on, full of paperwork and phone calls and the tedious work of undoing Derek's damage. But Jacob didn't mind. This was his world now, this office, this company, this second chance he'd never expected to receive. And tomorrow, there would be more work, more challenges. more opportunities to prove that Charlotte's faith in him hadn't been misplaced. But tonight, he sat with his daughter and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, solid, unshakable hope. And that, more than anything else, was worth every hard step that had led him here. The weeks after Derek's arrest passed in a strange blur of testimony, depositions, and the methodical work of untangling 3 years of carefully constructed lies. Jacob found himself sitting across from federal prosecutors, explaining how he'd identified the patterns in Derek's theft, walking them through spreadsheets and bank transfers with a confidence he didn't know he possessed. The prosecutors treated him with respect, not as a former grocery store cashier who'd gotten lucky, but as someone who genuinely solved a complex financial crime. Grace adjusted to their new life with the easy adaptability of childhood. They'd moved out of their cramped apartment into a modest 2-bedroom place closer to Charlotte's office, with actual heat that worked and windows that didn't rattle in the wind. Grace had her own room now, painted pale purple at her request, with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling and a bookshelf Jacob had assembled himself. She'd stood in the doorway that first night, eyes wide with wonder, and whispered, "Daddy, is this really ours?" "Yeah, monkey," he'd said, his throat tight. "This is really ours." Mrs. Rodriguez had cried when they moved, pulling Jacob into a fierce hug and making him promise to visit every week. "You're a good man, Jacob Miller," she'd said. "Don't you forget where you came from." He wouldn't, couldn't. Every morning when he put on one of his new suits, Charlotte had insisted, and he'd felt absurd in the fitting room until Grace had clapped her hands and declared him super fancy, he remembered what it felt like to count pennies for pasta. Every time he swiped his new health insurance card at Grace's doctor appointments, he thought about the nights he'd stayed awake, worried about affording her medication. The old life wasn't something to forget. It was something to honor, to remember, to let guide him. Charlotte noticed everything. She noticed when Jacob carefully saved his lunch receipts, still calculating expenses out of habit. She noticed when he hesitated before ordering coffee in meetings, some part of him still thinking about the $2.50 that could buy a box of pasta. She never commented directly, but she'd started having lunch brought in for the whole team, making sure there was always coffee and snacks available. Small kindnesses that didn't require anyone to feel like charity. "You're different from most executives I've worked with," Jacob told her one afternoon. They were in her office, reviewing the final audit report on Derek's theft. The total had climbed to $4.7 million once forensic accountants traced all his shell companies and fake invoices. Different how? Charlotte looked up from her laptop, genuinely curious. You see people, not just what they can do for you, but who they actually are. Jacob gestured to the office around them. Most CEOs wouldn't have hired someone like me. They definitely wouldn't have trusted me with something this important. Most CEOs wouldn't have gotten robbed for 3 years by their assistant, Charlotte said dryly. But I take your point. I learned early that credentials don't guarantee character. Some of the smartest people I've met never went to college. Some of the most ethical people I know have made mistakes. What matters is who you are when nobody's watching, how you treat people who can't do anything for you. Is that why you were at that charity event the night we met? Charlotte smiled slightly. Caught that, did you? Yes. I fund several programs for homeless youth and domestic violence survivors. It's not public. I don't do it for publicity. I do it because I was once a foster kid bouncing between homes, and someone helped me when they didn't have to, changed my whole trajectory. Jacob stared at her. In all the articles he'd read, all the profiles and interviews, he'd never seen this mentioned. Charlotte Lancaster, billionaire CEO, had been a foster kid. You never talk about that, he said quietly. No, because the minute it becomes public, it becomes my story. Look at the foster kid who made it big. I don't want to be anyone's inspiration porn. I just want to help kids who need help. She paused. But I'm telling you because I think you understand. You know what it's like to need help and not get it, to be judged for circumstances beyond your control. Yeah, Jacob said, I do. They worked in comfortable silence after that, but something had shifted. Charlotte had let him see behind the carefully constructed public persona, trusted him with something she kept private. It felt significant in a way Jacob couldn't quite name. Grace burst into the office around 4, her after-school energy filling the space like sunshine. She'd started coming to the office 3 days a week after school, doing homework in the conference room while Jacob finished work. Charlotte's assistant had set up a small desk for her, complete with a nameplate that read, Grace Miller, Chief Happiness Officer. Daddy, guess what? Grace dumped her backpack on the floor. Mrs. Chen said I can be line leader tomorrow. That's amazing, monkey. Jacob pulled her into a hug. What did you do to earn that? I helped Tommy with his math, even though he's kind of annoying sometimes, and I shared my snack with Emma because she forgot hers. Grace beamed with pride. Mrs. Chen said I was being a good friend. Charlotte looked up from her laptop, smiling. Sounds like you take after your dad. He's pretty good at helping people, too. I know. Grace settled into her chair, pulling out homework. Daddy's the best helper. One time when I was little, I dropped my ice cream and cried, and he gave me his even though he really wanted it. I don't remember that, Jacob said, amused. I was probably like 4, but I remember. Grace started on her math worksheet. Oh, and Daddy, can Charlotte come to my soccer game on Saturday? She said she wants to, but I should ask you first because you're the boss of me. Jacob glanced at Charlotte, who looked simultaneously hopeful and uncertain. You want to come to a 7-year-old soccer game? They're chaos. Nobody knows the rules. Half the kids are picking dandelions instead of playing. That sounds perfect, Charlotte said sincerely. If it's okay with you. Of course it's okay. Grace would love it. He paused. Fair warning, though. Parents get really intense, and by parents, I mean mostly dads who think their kid is the next soccer prodigy. I can handle intense dads. Charlotte grinned. I deal with venture capitalists. How much worse can it be? Saturday arrived bright and cold, the kind of November morning that promised winter wasn't far off. Jacob bundled Grace into her soccer uniform, braided her hair the way she liked, and drove to the community field where her team, the Lightning Bolts, played. Charlotte was already there when they arrived, looking adorably out of place in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, holding 2 coffees and a hot chocolate. I didn't know what you liked, so I got you a latte, she said, handing Jacob a cup. And Grace, this is for you after the game. Thank you. Grace hugged Charlotte's legs before running off to join her team. They settled onto the metal bleachers, and Jacob watched Charlotte take in the scene. The chaos of kids warming up, parents setting up folding chairs, coaches trying to organize 7-year-olds into something resembling positions. This was his world, the Saturday morning routine he'd built with Grace, and having Charlotte here felt both natural and surreal. She's excited you came, Jacob said. She's been talking about it all week. I'm excited to be here. Charlotte sipped her coffee. I've never been to a kid's soccer game. Is there, etiquette I should know? Cheer for everyone, even the other team. Don't yell at the ref. They're usually teenagers. And if Grace falls down, don't panic. She bounces. The game started, and it was exactly the beautiful chaos Jacob had promised. Kids ran in the wrong direction, forgot which goal they were defending, stopped to tie their shoes mid-play. Grace was in the middle of it all, fierce and determined, her braid flying behind her as she chased the ball. She's good, Charlotte observed. Actually good. Look at her footwork. She practices every night in the parking lot of our building. Well, our old building. Haven't set up a routine at the new place yet. There's a park 2 blocks from your apartment. Has a nice open field. You've been to my neighborhood? Charlotte looked slightly embarrassed. I wanted to make sure it was safe and close to good schools and had parks nearby. I might have done a little reconnaissance. Jacob didn't know what to say to that, to the casual revelation that Charlotte had cared enough to check out his neighborhood to make sure Grace would have places to play. Thank you, he said finally. For caring. Of course I care. Charlotte said it simply, like it was obvious. You two matter to me. Grace scored a goal in the second half, and the parents erupted in cheers. Jacob was on his feet immediately, shouting encouragement, and Charlotte was right beside him, clapping and whistling. Grace looked over at them, her face split in the biggest smile Jacob had ever seen, and waved before running back to position. After the game, Lightning Bolts won 3-2. Grace crashed into both of them, sweaty and happy and talking a mile a minute about the goal and how she'd totally meant to do that spin move even though it was kind of an accident. You were amazing, Charlotte said, crouching down to Grace's level. That goal was impressive. Did you see how I got it past their goalie? He's really tall, but I kicked it low, and he couldn't reach, Grace demonstrated with exaggerated gestures. Coach said I have good instincts. You definitely do. Charlotte pulled something from her bag. I got you something. I hope that's okay. She handed Grace a small package, carefully wrapped. Grace looked at Jacob for permission, and he nodded, curious. Inside was a soccer ball. Not a cheap one from a discount store, but a proper match ball, the kind professional players used. Grace's eyes went wide. This is for me? For you. I noticed your practice ball was pretty worn out. This one should last a while. Grace threw her arms around Charlotte in a fierce hug. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is the best present ever. Charlotte hugged her back, and Jacob saw tears in her eyes. When Grace ran off to show her teammates her new ball, Charlotte stood up, wiping her face. Sorry, I should have asked you first before giving her a gift. Charlotte, it's fine. It's perfect. She'll use that ball every day. Jacob touched her arm gently. Are you okay? I'm good. She's such a wonderful kid. You've raised someone really special. We've had a lot of help along the way. Jacob watched Grace show off her ball to the other kids. People like you, who show up when they don't have to. They went for lunch after, a little diner near the field that served breakfast all day. Grace ordered pancakes and sat between them in the booth, chattering about soccer and school and her friend Emma's new kitten. Charlotte listened with genuine interest, asking questions, laughing at Grace's stories, completely engaged. Watching them, Jacob felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just his boss being nice. This was something more, something that looked suspiciously like family. Daddy, can Charlotte come to my birthday party? Grace asked suddenly, syrup on her chin. It's in 3 weeks, and I'm going to be 8, which is basically grown up. Basically ancient, Charlotte agreed seriously. And I would love to come to your birthday party. What's the theme? Unicorns, Grace announced. But cool unicorns, like warrior unicorns that go on adventures. The best kind of unicorns. Charlotte looked at Jacob. If that's okay with you? Of course it's okay. More than okay. Right. It felt right. They dropped Charlotte off at her car after lunch, and Grace insisted on one more hug before they left. I really like her, Daddy, Grace said as they drove home. She's nice and funny, and she came to my soccer game even though she's really busy and important. Yeah, she did. Do you like her? Jacob glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. Yeah, monkey. I like her a lot. Good. Grace nodded with satisfaction. Because I think she likes us too. She did. Over the following weeks, Charlotte became a regular presence in their lives, and it happened so naturally that Jacob barely noticed the transition. She came to Grace's school play, where Grace had 2 lines as tree number 3 and delivered them with utmost seriousness. She joined them for pizza on Friday nights, helping Grace with math homework while Jacob cooked. She showed up at the office on the mornings after Jacob had been up all night with Grace's nightmares, rare now but still occasional, with extra coffee and the kind of understanding that didn't need explanation. The office had noticed. Jacob caught the knowing looks from other executives, the whispered conversations that stopped when he walked by. But Charlotte seemed oblivious, or maybe she just didn't care. She treated Jacob with the same respect and partnership she'd shown from the beginning, nothing inappropriate, nothing unprofessional. But there were moments when their hands touched reaching for the same document, when their eyes met across a conference table and something electric passed between them. Moments when Jacob would look up from his work and find Charlotte watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Moments when Grace fell asleep in the office and Charlotte would brush hair from her face with such tenderness that Jacob's heart physically ached. He tried not to think about it, tried to remember that Charlotte was his boss, that she was a billionaire CEO and he was a former grocery store cashier, that the distance between their worlds was measured in light years. Tried to focus on his job, on Grace, on building a stable life. But his heart had other ideas. It all came to a head 3 weeks later at Grace's birthday party. Jacob had rented space at a community center, invited Grace's entire class, and spent his morning decorating with purple streamers and unicorn balloons. Mrs. Rodriguez had made a cake, chocolate with vanilla frosting, decorated with a fierce-looking unicorn that Grace absolutely loved. Parents milled around drinking coffee, kids ran wild playing games, and chaos reigned in the best possible way. Charlotte arrived with a gift bag and that same slightly uncertain expression she wore whenever she entered Jacob's personal life. Like she wasn't sure she belonged there, even though Jacob had made it clear she absolutely did. "You made it," Jacob said, relieved. Grace had been asking about Charlotte every 5 minutes. "Of course I made it. I wouldn't miss this." Charlotte handed him the gift bag. "Is this too much? I wasn't sure what 8-year-olds like." Inside was a collection of books, adventure stories with strong female protagonists, all beautifully illustrated. Perfect for Grace. "She's gonna love these," Jacob assured her. "Thank you." Grace spotted Charlotte and came running, nearly knocking her over with an enthusiastic hug. "You came! Daddy said you would, but I was worried you'd be too busy." "Never too busy for your birthday." Charlotte crouched down. "Happy birthday, Grace. 8 years old is a big deal." "I know! I'm basically a teenager now." "Let's not rush that," Jacob interjected, making both Charlotte and Grace laugh. The party was wonderful. Kids played games, ate cake, and ran around with the boundless energy of childhood. Charlotte fit in seamlessly, helping with activities, cutting cake, and at one point settling a dispute between two kids over who got which color balloon with the kind of diplomatic skill that probably served her well in boardrooms. Jacob watched her, couldn't help watching her, and thought about how naturally she'd become part of their lives, how Grace lit up when Charlotte walked into a room, how his own heart seemed to beat differently when she was near. "She's good with kids," Mrs. Rodriguez commented, appearing at Jacob's elbow. "And good with you." "She's my boss, Mrs. Rodriguez." "Mm-hmm." Mrs. Rodriguez's tone suggested she wasn't buying that explanation. "And I'm the Queen of England. Jacob, that woman looks at you like you hung the moon." "You're imagining things. I'm old, not blind, and you look at her the same way." Mrs. Rodriguez patted his arm. "Life's too short to ignore something good because you're scared." "I'm not scared." "You're terrified, but that's okay. Good things are usually terrifying at first." The party wound down as parents collected their exhausted, sugar-crashed children. Grace, riding the high of being the birthday girl, helped clean up while chattering about her favorite moments. Charlotte stayed to help, stacking chairs and picking up stray balloons, completely at ease. "This was really special," Charlotte said as they loaded the last of the supplies into Jacob's car. Grace had gone with Mrs. Rodriguez to drop off leftover cake to neighbors. "Thank you for including me. Grace wanted you here. I wanted you here." Jacob closed the trunk. "You're not just my boss, Charlotte. You're—" He stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. "I'm what?" Charlotte asked softly. "Important, essential, someone I can't stop thinking about, someone I might be falling for in a way that terrifies me." "Your family," Jacob said finally, "to both of us." Charlotte smiled, but something flickered in her eyes, something that looked like disappointment. "Family. That's good. That's really good." They stood in the parking lot, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows, and Jacob knew he'd said the wrong thing. Family was good, family was safe, but it wasn't the whole truth. "Charlotte, I should go." She was already moving toward her car. "Tell Grace I had a wonderful time. I'll see you Monday?" "Yeah, Monday." Jacob watched her drive away and felt like he'd missed something important, let something precious slip through his fingers. Grace came running back, full of energy despite the long day. "Where's Charlotte?" "She had to go." "Oh." Grace looked disappointed. "I wanted to show her my books again. They're so cool, Daddy. There's one about a girl who becomes a knight and fights a dragon." "We can tell her about it Monday." "Okay." Grace climbed into the car, and as Jacob drove them home, she was unusually quiet. "What's up, monkey?" he asked. "Do you think Charlotte has anyone to eat dinner with tonight?" The question hit Jacob square in the chest. "What do you mean?" "Like, she came to my party and helped clean up and everything, but then she left alone. Does she have a family?" Jacob realized he didn't know. In all their conversations, Charlotte had never mentioned a partner, children, anyone waiting for her at home. She'd mentioned being a foster kid, building her company, her work, but never a personal life. "I don't know, Grace. That's sad. Everyone should have someone to eat dinner with." Grace was quiet for a moment. "We should invite her for dinner more. So she's not alone. Out of the mouths of children came wisdom that adults were too cautious to speak. Grace had identified what Jacob had been too afraid to acknowledge. Charlotte was alone. Successful, powerful, generous. Charlotte was alone. And maybe she wanted to be less alone, and maybe that's what Jacob had seen in her eyes in the parking lot when he'd said she was family and nothing more. That night, after Grace was asleep, Jacob sat on his couch and stared at his phone. He typed and deleted a dozen messages to Charlotte before finally settling on something simple. "Thank you for today. Grace loved having you there. We both did." Charlotte's response came quickly. "Thank you for including me. It meant more than you know." Jacob stared at those words. It meant more than you know, and wondered what he was too scared to see. Monday morning arrived with the weight of unspoken things. Jacob got to the office early, determined to focus on work, and not on the complicated feelings churning in his chest. He had reports to review, meetings to prepare for, the comfortable structure of professional responsibility. Charlotte was already in her office when he arrived, and something was different. She was more distant, more formal. Still professional, still kind, but the easy warmth they'd developed was muted, like she'd deliberately stepped back. It took Jacob until Wednesday to realize what was happening. Charlotte was protecting herself. She'd put herself out there, showing up to soccer games and birthday parties, becoming part of their lives. And when Jacob had called her family instead of something more, she'd taken the hint. She thought he wasn't interested. The realization hit him during a meeting about quarterly projections. Charlotte was presenting data, completely in her element, commanding the room with the kind of natural authority that made her such an effective CEO. And all Jacob could think was how wrong he'd been, how badly he'd misread the situation. He wasn't afraid of Charlotte having too much power or too much money. He was afraid of not being enough for her, afraid that a woman who could have anyone would never truly want a man who'd been fired from a grocery store, who'd needed rescuing, who came with a 7-year-old daughter and a whole lot of baggage. But Grace's question echoed in his mind. Does she have anyone to eat dinner with tonight? Maybe Charlotte was also afraid of being too much, of using her position inappropriately, of wanting something she thought she couldn't have. Maybe they were both idiots. After the meeting, Jacob caught up with Charlotte in the hallway. "Can we talk? Privately?" She looked surprised, but nodded. "Of course. My office?" They walked in silence, and Jacob's heart was hammering so hard he thought everyone they passed could probably hear it. Charlotte closed the door behind them and turned to face him, her expression carefully neutral. "What's going on?" she asked. Jacob took a breath. This was it. Either he'd ruin everything or he'd fix what he'd broken in that parking lot. "I need to tell you something," he began, "and I need you to let me get through it without interrupting, because if I stop, I might lose my nerve." Charlotte's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. "When you came to my door that morning, I thought it was a fever dream. I thought maybe I'd had a breakdown and was hallucinating, because things like that don't happen to people like me. Billionaire CEOs don't track down grocery store cashiers to offer them 6-figure jobs. But you did. You gave me a chance when I had nothing, when I was about to lose everything, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that." Jacob moved closer, his heart in his throat. But somewhere along the way, gratitude became something else, became something bigger and scarier and more important. You showing up to Grace's soccer game, helping with her homework, being patient with her endless questions about literally everything. You made yourself part of our lives so naturally that I didn't even notice it happening until it had already happened. And then at her birthday party, when you asked what you were to us, I said family because I was scared to say what I really meant. Charlotte's professional mask was cracking, emotion showing through. "What did you mean?" she asked quietly. "I meant that I'm falling in love with you," Jacob said, and the words came easier than he expected. "I meant that Grace asks about you every night before bed, that she draws pictures of the three of us, that she wants you at every important moment of her life. I meant that when I imagine the future, you're in it, not as my boss or my friend, but as something more, as someone who belongs with us." Charlotte's hand went to her mouth, tears spilling over. "I know I'm probably breaking every HR rule," Jacob continued. "I know there's a power dynamic issue. I know I'm risking everything by saying this, but I can't. I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel. So here it is. I'm in love with you, Charlotte, Completely. And if that makes you uncomfortable, if it's too much or too complicated, I understand, but I needed you to know. The silence that followed was the longest of Jacob's life. Charlotte just stood there, tears running down her face, not saying anything, and Jacob felt his heart beginning to crack. He'd ruined it, misread everything. She was going to tell him he was mistaken, that she cared about him and Grace, but only as friends, that he needed to be professional. Then Charlotte closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps and kissed him. It wasn't a careful kiss or a tentative kiss. It was a kiss that said everything words couldn't, longing and relief and rightness and home. Jacob's hands came up to frame her face, and she made a small sound that sent electricity through his entire body. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Charlotte was smiling through her tears. "I've been in love with you since the moment you gave me that $20, she whispered. "You were exhausted and scared, and you had every reason to keep walking, but you stopped. You helped. And then when I met Grace and saw the kind of father you are, the kind of person you are, Jacob, I didn't stand a chance." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I'm your boss. Because I have all the power in this dynamic, and I never wanted you to feel pressured or obligated. Because I was terrified you only saw me as someone who'd helped you, not as—" She stopped. "Not as someone you could love." "I love you, Alhong," Jacob said, because it felt important to say it again, to make sure she heard it. "Not because you gave me a job, not because you helped us, because of who you are. Brilliant and kind and strong and somehow completely down to earth despite being worth billions. Because you show up, because you care. Because when you're with Grace, I see you light up the same way I do. Because when I'm with you, everything feels possible." Charlotte kissed him again, softer this time, like she was memorizing the moment. "What do we do now?" she asked. "I don't know. Figure it out together?" "I like that plan." Charlotte laughed, a little breathless. "We're going to have to navigate this carefully. HR, optics, making sure nobody thinks, I know, we'll be careful. We'll be smart about it." "But Jacob—" Charlotte looked up at him with eyes full of love and certainty. "I'm not hiding this. I'm not pretending I don't feel what I feel. We'll be professional at work, but outside of this office, I want the world to know you're mine." "And you're mine," Jacob said, and the possessiveness in his voice surprised even him. They stood there in Charlotte's office, holding each other, and Jacob thought about the journey that had brought him here. From that bus stop where he'd given away his last $20 to this moment, held by someone who saw him, really saw him, and loved him anyway. "We should probably tell Grace," Charlotte said eventually. "She's going to lose her mind. She's been drawing pictures of the 3 of us for weeks. Smart kid. The smartest." They pulled apart reluctantly, and Charlotte wiped her face, trying to compose herself. She looked young suddenly, vulnerable, and Jacob loved her even more for it. "Tonight?" Charlotte asked. "We could tell her together, maybe over dinner?" "Yeah, tonight," Jacob smiled. "Fair warning, though. She's going to have approximately 10,000 questions." "I'm ready for 10,000 questions." Charlotte straightened her jacket, back in CEO mode, but softer somehow. "I've been ready for this, Jacob. For you. For Grace. For all of it." Jacob believed her. For the first time in a long time, he believed in something bigger than survival, bigger than just getting through the day. He believed in possibility. And tonight, he would take the woman he loved home to tell his daughter that their family of 2 was becoming a family of 3. The thought filled him with joy so profound he could barely breathe. They picked Grace up from school together that afternoon, and Jacob watched his daughter's face transform when she saw Charlotte waiting beside him at the pickup line. "Charlotte!" Grace broke into a run, backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "What are you doing here?" "I thought maybe we could all have dinner together tonight," Charlotte said, crouching down to Grace's level. "If that's okay with you?" "Yes, yes, yes." Grace threw her arms around Charlotte's neck. "Can we get pizza or tacos or both?" "How about we go to that place you've been wanting to try?" Jacob suggested. "The one with the pasta bar where you build your own dish?" Grace's eyes went wide. "Really? That place is fancy." "Tonight's a fancy kind of night," Charlotte said, and the look she gave Jacob over Grace's head was full of warmth and promise. They drove to the restaurant in Charlotte's car because Grace loved the heated seats and the way the windows went up and down with just a button. She chattered the entire way, telling Charlotte about her day, about how she'd gotten 100% on her spelling test, about how her friend Emma had brought her hamster to show and tell and it had escaped and they'd spent 20 minutes trying to catch it. Charlotte listened with genuine attention, asking questions, laughing at the right moments, completely engaged. Jacob watched them from the driver's seat. Charlotte had insisted he drive her car, said she wanted to sit in back with Grace, and felt his heart expand with something that felt like completion. The restaurant was busy, but they got a table by the window, and Grace immediately dove into the menu even though she couldn't read half the words. Charlotte helped her sound out the options, patient and encouraging, while Jacob just watched them both and wondered how he'd gotten this lucky. "Okay," Grace announced after they'd ordered. "I want the penne with Alfredo sauce and chicken and broccoli and lots of cheese. The tupachas seats." "Excellent choice," Charlotte said seriously. "Very sophisticated." "I'm very sophisticated now that I'm 8. Grace took a sip of her water like she was drinking wine. "Daddy, what are you getting?" "I'm thinking the carbonara." "Charlotte?" "The same. I trust your judgment." She smiled at him, and it took everything in Jacob's power not to reach across the table and take her hand. They made it through appetizers and most of dinner before Grace asked the question Jacob had been both expecting and dreading. "So are you guys like boyfriend and girlfriend now?" Jacob nearly choked on his pasta. Charlotte's eyes went wide. They'd planned to ease into this conversation, to be gentle and careful, but Grace had apparently decided to skip straight to the point. "What makes you ask that, monkey?" Jacob managed. Grace rolled her eyes with the exasperation of someone far older than 8. "You look at each other all googly, and you smile different when you talk to each other. And Charlotte's been coming to all my stuff and helping with homework and being part of our family." She took a bite of chicken. "Plus, Emma's mom has a boyfriend, and she looks at him the same way you guys look at each other." Charlotte started laughing, that genuine, delighted laugh that made her whole face light up. "She's got us figured out." "Apparently." Jacob looked at his daughter. "Would it be okay with you if Charlotte and I were more than friends?" Grace set down her fork with great ceremony. "Let me think about it." Jacob's heart stuttered. He hadn't considered that Grace might not be ready for this, might need time to adjust to the idea of sharing him with someone else. Grace tapped her chin, clearly enjoying the drama of the moment. "Will she still come to my soccer games?" "Absolutely," Charlotte said immediately. "And help with homework?" "Whenever you need me." "And have movie nights with us?" "I wouldn't miss them." "And what about when you guys have fights? Because Emma's mom and her boyfriend fight sometimes, and then her mom gets sad." Charlotte reached across the table and took Grace's hand. "Grace, I can't promise your dad and I will never disagree about things. All people who care about each other sometimes have disagreements. But I can promise that I will never, ever stop caring about you. Even if your dad and I are upset with each other, that doesn't change how much I love spending time with you, okay?" "You love spending time with me?" Grace's voice was small, vulnerable in a way that made Jacob's chest ache. "I really do. You're smart and funny and kind, and being around you makes my whole day better." Grace was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she looked at Jacob. "Do you love her, Daddy?" "Yeah, monkey, I really do." "And Charlotte, do you love my daddy?" "I do," Charlotte said without hesitation. "Very much." "And you both still love me?" "Always," they said in unison, and Grace's face broke into the biggest smile. "Then it's okay with me." She picked up her fork and went back to her pasta like she hadn't just given them permission to reshape their entire lives. "This is good. Now I have 2 people to help me with math instead of just 1. Jacob felt tears prickling his eyes. Charlotte was openly crying, wiping her face with her napkin. "Grace Miller," Charlotte said, her voice thick with emotion, "you are the most wonderful person I've ever met." "I know," Grace said matter-of-factly. "Daddy tells me that all the time." They finished dinner in a bubble of happiness, and when they walked to the car, Grace insisted on holding both their hands, swinging between them like she used to do when she was younger. People smiled at them as they passed. A family. That's what they looked like. A family. That night, after Grace was tucked into bed with her new favorite book, Jacob and Charlotte sat on his couch in the quiet apartment. It was the first time they'd been truly alone since their conversation in her office, and the weight of what they'd just done settled over them. "That went better than I expected," Jacob said. "She's incredible. You've raised an incredible human." Charlotte leaned against him, fitting into his side like she'd always belonged there. "I was so nervous. What if she'd said no? What if she wasn't ready?" "But she was. She's been ready. Drawing pictures of the three of us, asking if you were coming to everything, making sure you weren't eating dinner alone." Jacob ran his fingers through Charlotte's hair, still marveling that he was allowed to do this. "Kids are more adaptable than we give them credit for." "My therapist says that a lot," Charlotte admitted. "That kids are resilient, that they can handle change if the adults in their lives are honest and consistent." "You have a therapist?" 3 years now. Started after my company hit its first major milestone and I realized success didn't automatically equal happiness. Charlotte shifted to look at him. "I wanted to work through some stuff from my childhood, learn healthy relationship patterns since I didn't really grow up with good examples." Jacob kissed her forehead. "That's really brave, going to therapy." "It's necessary. I don't want to bring all my baggage into this without at least unpacking some of it first." She paused. "What about you? Have you thought about talking to someone? About what happened at your old job, about being a single parent, about everything you've been carrying?" "I've thought about it," Jacob admitted. "Money was always the issue. But now that I have insurance, we could find someone together. Someone who specializes in families, who could help all three of us navigate this transition." Charlotte sat up. "Not because anything's wrong, but because I want to do this right. I want to be good for you and for Grace, and I want to make sure we're building something healthy. I love that you think about things like that." "I love you," Charlotte said simply. "And that means wanting to be my best self for you." They talked for hours about logistics and boundaries and how to handle things at work. They decided to inform HR immediately, to be completely transparent about their relationship. Charlotte would recuse herself from any decisions about Jacob's compensation or position. They'd be professional in the office, save the personal stuff for after hours. "People are going to talk," Charlotte warned. "They're going to say you're only with me for my money, that I'm taking advantage of my position, that this is inappropriate." "Let them talk." Jacob pulled her closer. "I know why I'm with you. You know why you're with me. Grace knows. That's what matters." "You're sure?" "Because it could get ugly. The press might pick it up. There could be articles, speculation." "Charlotte." Jacob turned her face toward his. "I walked 4 miles in the cold to save $5 for pasta. I got fired for something I didn't do. I know what it feels like when life gets ugly. And I'm telling you, facing that with you is better than facing anything without you." She kissed him then, deep and sure, and Jacob felt like he was falling and flying at the same time. The next few weeks were an exercise in balance. At work, they were professional, respectful, collaborative, but not overly familiar. Outside the office, they were building something that felt simultaneously new and ancient, like they'd been waiting their whole lives to find each other. Charlotte officially met Mrs. Rodriguez, who took one look at them together and said, "About time. I was starting to think you were both blind." She fed them tamales and told Charlotte embarrassing stories about Jacob from when he'd first moved into the building, and Charlotte laughed until she cried. They established routines. Charlotte came for dinner twice a week, and they'd cook together while Grace did homework at the kitchen table. Friday nights became movie nights, with Grace picking increasingly elaborate films that usually ended with her falling asleep before the climax. Saturdays were for soccer, followed by lunch and whatever adventure Grace wanted to go on. The science museum, the park, the bookstore, where Charlotte always ended up buying half the children's section. The office adjusted faster than Jacob expected. HR had been professional, if slightly concerned, but Charlotte's transparency and their clear boundaries eased most worries. A few executives seemed skeptical, but when Derek's trial resulted in a conviction and a 15-year sentence, most people seemed to remember that Jacob had saved the company millions and earned his position. The CFO pulled Jacob aside one afternoon about a month into his relationship with Charlotte. "Look, Miller, I'm going to be straight with you. When Charlotte first hired you, I thought it was a publicity stunt or charity case or something. But you're good at what you do, really good. And Charlotte's happier than I've seen her in the decade I've worked for her. So whatever people say, you've got my support." Thank you, Jacob said, genuinely moved. That means a lot. Just don't screw it up. Charlotte's one of the good ones, and she deserves someone who sees that. I do. I really do. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments when the difference in their backgrounds became stark and uncomfortable, like when Charlotte casually mentioned flying to Paris for a weekend and seemed genuinely surprised when Jacob said he'd never been on a plane. Or when they went to a charity gala and Jacob felt completely out of place among people who considered $20,000 donations a casual evening expense. I don't belong in this world, Jacob said one night after a particularly awkward benefit dinner. They were back at his apartment, and he was still wearing the tuxedo Charlotte had insisted on buying him. Those people tonight, they have Ivy League degrees and family money and networks I can't even comprehend. I served one of them groceries 6 months ago. So? Charlotte was changing out of her gown, completely unconcerned. So I'm a fraud. I'm playing dress-up in a world where I don't belong. Charlotte stopped and turned to face him. Jacob Miller, you listen to me. Those people tonight, half of them inherited their wealth and have never worked a real day in their lives. The other half are so focused on making money that they've forgotten how to be human. You know what makes you different? You've lived in the real world. You know what it's like to struggle, to have to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. It doesn't feel like wisdom when I'm standing in a ballroom not knowing which fork to use. Then learn. I'll teach you. But don't you dare think that the value you bring to my life has anything to do with knowing about wine pairings or who went to which prep school. She came to him, still in her slip, and took his face in her hands. You taught me that kindness still exists. You showed me what real integrity looks like. You and Grace reminded me why I do what I do, not to make money, but to help people. That's worth more than any network or degree. You really believe that? I know that. And Jacob, those people tonight, they're jealous. You have something real, something money can't buy. You have love and family and purpose. Most of them would trade their portfolios for what we have. Jacob pulled her close, breathing in her scent. I love you. I love you too. Now get out of that ridiculous tuxedo and come to bed. I have to be up early for a meeting, and I'd like at least a few hours sleeping next to you first. They'd been together for 3 months when the article hit. Someone had leaked their relationship to a business blog, and the headline was brutal. Lancaster CEO dating former employee, power imbalance, or love story. The article was surprisingly even-handed, presenting both sides, but the comment section was vicious. Gold digger, boy toy, sugar mama, poor judgment, HR nightmare. People who'd never met them had strong opinions about their relationship, their motivations, their future. Jacob read through it all, each comment a small cut, until Charlotte physically took his phone away. Don't do this to yourself, she said. They were in her office, door closed. The article pulled up on her computer. These people don't know us. They don't know what we have. They're saying I'm using you for your money, that you're having some kind of crisis, and I'm taking advantage. And we know that's not true. Jacob, look at me. She waited until he met her eyes. I knew this was coming. I warned you it would get ugly. But here's what I also know. Every single one of those commenters would love to have what we have. They're sitting behind keyboards judging something they don't understand because it makes them feel better about their own unhappy lives. What if it affects Grace? What if kids at school say something? Then we'll handle it, together. But we're not going to hide, and we're not going to apologize for loving each other. Charlotte stood up, straightening her jacket. In fact, I'm going to release a statement. Charlotte, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because this isn't just about us. It's about every relationship that doesn't fit the mold. It's about showing Grace that you don't hide love because people might judge. She was already typing. I'm going to be very clear that you were hired based on merit, that our relationship developed naturally over time, that we followed every protocol and guideline, and I'm going to make it very clear that I don't appreciate people speculating about my personal life. The statement went out that afternoon, professional but firm. Charlotte confirmed the relationship, outlined the timeline and the HR measures they'd taken, and concluded with a line that made Jacob fall even more in love with her. Jacob Miller is one of the most ethical, hardworking, and genuinely good people I've ever met. I'm grateful every day that chance brought us together, and I'm proud to build a life with him and his daughter. The response was mixed but largely supportive. Several business leaders came to their defense. A few employees went on record saying Jacob had earned his position long before they'd started dating. The negative voices got quieter, drowned out by people willing to see the humanity in their story. Grace, predictably, was unfazed. Emma's mom saw the article, she reported one night at dinner. She said you guys are relationship goals, whatever that means, and she wants Charlotte's secret for finding a good man because Emma's dad is apparently useless. Grace took a bite of her chicken. I told her Charlotte found Daddy at a bus stop, so maybe she should try hanging out at bus stops. Jacob nearly spit out his water. Charlotte was laughing so hard she couldn't breathe. That's solid advice, monkey, Jacob managed. Very logical. I know, I'm very logical now that I'm 8. As winter deepened into spring, their relationship deepened too. Charlotte spent more nights at Jacob's apartment, then started keeping clothes there, then officially moved some of her things in. Grace was thrilled, immediately reorganizing the closet to make room and declaring that Charlotte should definitely bring her coffee maker because theirs was really old and kind of sad. They fell into the rhythm of family life, grocery shopping together, cooking dinners, helping with homework, navigating the chaos of a third grader's social life. Charlotte learned to braid hair and to tell when Grace needed space versus when she needed attention. Jacob learned about Charlotte's work stress and how she needed quiet time after difficult days. Grace learned that having 2 adults who loved her meant twice the support and also twice the people who made her clean her room. It wasn't perfect. Charlotte sometimes worked too late and missed dinner. Jacob sometimes got insecure when Charlotte had to travel for business. Grace sometimes tested boundaries, seeing how much she could get away with now that there were 2 authority figures to play against each other. But they talked through it. Late-night conversations after Grace was asleep, honest discussions about fears and needs and expectations. Charlotte started therapy with them as a family unit, and they learned to communicate better, to see each other's perspectives, to build something stronger than the sum of its parts. Derek's trial came and went. Jacob testified, walking the jury through how he'd identified the theft, how Derek had built an empire of fraud over 3 years. Derek's lawyer tried to paint Jacob as an opportunist, someone who'd manipulated his way into Charlotte's life and company, but the evidence was overwhelming. Derek was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. How do you feel? Charlotte asked after the verdict. They were sitting in her car outside the courthouse, neither of them ready to return to normal life just yet. Relieved, Jacob said, and kind of sad. Derek could have just done his job. He was good at it. He didn't need to steal, but he got greedy, or desperate, or entitled, or any number of things that make people compromise their values. Charlotte reached for his hand. You never did, though. Even when you were desperate, even when you had every reason to take what you needed, you stayed honest. I had Grace. I couldn't teach her that stealing was okay. Most people would have justified it, would have said they deserved it, that the system was unfair, that it was only fair to take what they needed. Charlotte squeezed his hand. You're a better person than most people, Jacob Miller. I'm just a person, trying to do right by my kid. That's what makes you remarkable. They drove home to Grace, who'd spent the day with Mrs. Rodriguez and had approximately 1 million things to tell them. That night, they ordered pizza and watched a movie and didn't talk about trials or theft or anything heavy. They just existed together, 3 people who'd found each other against impossible odds. Later, after Grace was asleep, Charlotte and Jacob stood in the kitchen washing dishes. It was domestic and simple and perfect. I've been thinking, Charlotte said, scrubbing a plate. My lease is up next month. Yeah? And I've been spending most of my time here anyway. She set down the plate and turned to face him. What would you think about me officially moving in? Making this permanent? Jacob's heart kicked into overdrive. Are you sure? That's a big step. I'm very sure. Jacob, I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to be here for Grace's nightmares and her triumphs and her everyday moments. I want to split grocery shopping and argue about whose turn it is to take out the trash and build a real life together. She paused. Unless you need more time. I don't want to rush you. I don't need more time. Jacob pulled her close. I want you here. Grace wants you here. This hasn't felt complete without you. So that's a yes? That's a yes. Charlotte kissed him, soft and sweet, and Jacob thought about the journey that had led them here. From a bus stop in the worst neighborhood in Philadelphia to this moment, standing in a kitchen washing dishes and planning a future together. "We should tell Grace tomorrow," Charlotte said against his lips. "Make it official. She's going to want to redecorate. Fair warning. I'm prepared for extensive interior design discussions." They finished the dishes and went to bed, and Jacob lay awake for a while just watching Charlotte sleep beside him. She looked younger like this, peaceful, without the weight of running a billion-dollar company on her shoulders. Just Charlotte, the woman who'd shown up at his door when his life was falling apart. The woman who'd taken a chance on him when nobody else would. The woman he was going to spend the rest of his life loving. Grace's reaction the next morning was exactly as predicted. She screamed with joy, then immediately started planning Charlotte's room setup and which drawer should hold what. "This is the best news ever," Grace was bouncing on the couch. "Charlotte, you can have the shelf in the bathroom for your stuff. And Daddy, we need to clean out the hall closet so she has space, and we should get flowers for the table because that's what families do." "Families also eat breakfast," Jacob pointed out. "How about we celebrate with pancakes?" "Yes." "Charlotte, Daddy makes the best pancakes. He puts chocolate chips in them when I'm good." "Were you good this week?" Charlotte asked seriously. "So good. I did all my homework and I helped Mrs. Rodriguez carry her groceries, and I only argued about bedtime once." "That sounds like chocolate chip pancake behavior to me." They made pancakes together, all three of them in the small kitchen, bumping into each other and laughing when batter splattered everywhere. It was chaotic and messy and absolutely perfect. After breakfast, Grace dragged them through the apartment, pointing out all the changes they needed to make now that Charlotte was officially moving in. More bookshelves, better curtains, definitely a bigger couch. She had opinions on everything, and Charlotte listened to all of them with patience and genuine interest. "You're really good at this," Jacob said during a quiet moment while Grace was in her room making a welcome sign for Charlotte. "At what?" "At being part of a family. I know you didn't grow up with good examples, but you're a natural." Charlotte's eyes got misty. "I always wondered if I'd be good at this. If I could do the domestic thing, the family thing. I was scared I wouldn't know how." "You know how because you care. That's all it takes." Jacob kissed her temple. "Well, that and being willing to discuss curtain options for 45 minutes. Those curtains are important. They set the tone for the whole living space. See? Natural." Charlotte moved in over the following weeks, and Jacob's small apartment transformed. Not into something fancy or expensive, but into a home that reflected all three of them. Charlotte's books mixed with Grace's art supplies and Jacob's sports memorabilia. The coffee maker got an upgrade. The couch got replaced with one that could fit all of them comfortably for movie nights. Mrs. Rodriguez cried when she came over for the first time after Charlotte had fully moved in. "This is what I prayed for," she said, pulling Jacob aside. "You and Grace having someone to love you the way you deserve. She's good for you, Jacob. She makes you both shine brighter." "I know, I'm lucky." "Not luck. Blessing. You gave when you had nothing, and the universe gave back." Mrs. Rodriguez patted his cheek. "Never forget that kindness matters. It always matters." 6 months after Charlotte moved in, Jacob woke up one Saturday morning to find her already awake, staring at the ceiling with a strange expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately worried. "Nothing's wrong. The opposite of wrong." She turned to look at him. "I want to marry you." Jacob's brain short-circuited. "What?" "I want to marry you. I want to be Grace's stepmother officially. I want us to be a family in every way that matters." Charlotte propped herself up on one elbow. "I know it's fast. I know we've only been together 8 months, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Jacob's heart was racing. "Are you proposing to me?" "I think I am. I didn't plan this. It just came out." Charlotte laughed nervously. "Is that okay? Can women propose? I feel like I'm breaking protocol." Charlotte Lancaster, CEO of a billion-dollar company, worried about protocol. Jacob pulled her on top of him. "Yes. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Yes to all of it." Charlotte kissed him, and they stayed in bed for another hour, talking about the future, making plans, imagining what forever would look like. When they finally emerged, Grace was eating cereal and watching cartoons. "Grace, we have something to tell you,"
Charlotte said, sitting beside her on the couch. Grace muted the TV, looking between them with interest. Are you guys getting married? They stared at her. How did you know? Jacob asked. You had that look, the googly look, but more. Plus, Charlotte's been looking at rings on her computer when she thinks nobody's paying attention. Grace took another bite of cereal. I think you should get married in the spring. Flowers are pretty in spring, and I should definitely be in the wedding because I'm part of the family. You're absolutely part of the wedding, Charlotte confirmed. In fact, we were hoping you'd be our maid of honor. Grace's eyes went wide. Really? Really? This family wouldn't exist without you. You brought us together. I did kind of do that, didn't I? Grace grinned. Okay, I accept, but I get to help pick my dress, and we need to have cake. Lots of cake. They spent the rest of the day talking about wedding plans, with Grace contributing increasingly elaborate ideas that Charlotte indulged with far more patience than necessary. By bedtime, they had decided on a small ceremony in the spring, something intimate with family and close friends. That night, tucking Grace into bed, Jacob watched his daughter's eyes drift closed and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Daddy? Grace mumbled, half asleep. Yeah, monkey? I'm glad you gave that lady your money at the bus stop. Jacob's throat tightened. Me too, baby. It was a good choice, the best choice, the very best. Grace smiled and fell asleep, and Jacob stood there for a long moment, thinking about choices and chance and how sometimes the hardest moments led to the most beautiful outcomes. He found Charlotte in their bedroom, already changed for bed, and climbed in beside her. Thank you, he said. For what? For being desperate enough to need help that night, for tracking me down, for giving me a chance, for loving Grace, for loving me. Jacob pulled her close. For showing up at exactly the right moment and changing everything. You changed everything, Charlotte corrected. You saw someone in trouble and helped without thinking about what it would cost you. That's who you are, Jacob. That's why I love you. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, two people who'd found their way to each other through kindness and courage and pure dumb luck. Outside, the city hummed with life, full of people making choices, taking chances, living their own impossible stories. And somewhere in Philadelphia, someone else was probably having the worst day of their life, desperately needing help. Jacob hoped they'd find their own Charlotte Lancaster, their own moment of grace, their own impossible transformation, because he knew now, with absolute certainty, that kindness wasn't just nice. It was revolutionary. It was powerful. It was the force that could change everything, one $20 bill at a time. Spring arrived in Philadelphia with the kind of hopeful warmth that made everyone believe in new beginnings. The trees along their street budded with green, the park 2 blocks from their apartment filled with families and joggers, and Grace spent every afternoon after school practicing her soccer skills on the field, where she'd soon be playing in the championship game. Jacob stood at their apartment window watching Charlotte and Grace kick the ball back and forth, both of them laughing when Charlotte missed an easy pass and had to chase the ball across the grass. In 3 weeks, he and Charlotte would be married in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens, with Grace as their maid of honor and about 50 of their closest friends and family in attendance. The ring in his pocket felt like both a promise and a question mark. Charlotte had proposed to him, but Jacob had his own plans. He'd spent the last month working with a jeweler to create something special, something that honored all 3 of them, and today felt like the right moment. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Rodriguez. They still outside? I made flan. Come get some before I eat it all. Jacob smiled and texted back that he'd be right over. Mrs. Rodriguez had been baking nonstop for the wedding, insisting that store-bought cake was fine, but homemade desserts were what made celebrations special. She'd become like family, the grandmother Grace had never had, the wise counsel Jacob still needed, the connection to who they'd been before everything changed. He headed outside to collect his girls, and the phrase stopped him cold. His girls. When had that become so natural? When had Charlotte become so integral to his identity that he couldn't imagine life without her? Daddy, Grace waved from across the field, come play with us. Jacob jogged over, and Charlotte immediately passed him the ball. He dribbled it toward Grace, who defended with surprising ferocity for an 8-year-old.
No mercy, Daddy, she shouted, stealing the ball and racing toward the makeshift goal they'd set up with their jackets. They played until the sun started to set, until Grace was exhausted and happy, and Charlotte's expensive workout clothes were covered in grass stains she didn't seem to care about at all. Mrs. Rodriguez made flan, Jacob announced. Who wants some? Me. Grace was already running toward their building. They climbed the stairs to Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment, and she opened the door before they could knock, her face creasing with joy at the sight of them. Look at you three, all sweaty and happy, she said, ushering them inside. Sit. I'll get plates. Her apartment smelled like cinnamon and comfort, and Jacob felt the familiar warmth of coming home. Grace immediately launched into a detailed account of their soccer game, complete with dramatic reenactments of her best moves. Mrs. Rodriguez served generous portions of flan and listened to Grace with the patient attention that made children feel important. Charlotte helped clear plates afterward, moving through the small kitchen with an ease that came from months of weekly visits. So, 3 weeks until the big day, Mrs. Rodriguez said, settling into her favorite chair. Are you nervous? Not even a little, Charlotte answered. I've never been more sure of anything. And you, Jacob? Getting cold feet? The opposite of cold feet. Jacob reached for Charlotte's hand. I wake up every morning amazed that this is my life. Good. You both deserve happiness. Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes were misty. Jacob, you remember when you first moved in? You were so worried about everything, carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Look at you now. I had help, Jacob said quietly. You helped. Charlotte helped. A lot of people helped. And you helped others first. That's how it works. Mrs. Rodriguez turned to Grace. Your father gave away his last $20 to help someone who needed it. Did you know that? Grace nodded seriously. He tells me that story sometimes, about how he met Charlotte. What do you think about that story? Mrs. Rodriguez asked. Grace thought for a moment, her face scrunched in concentration. I think Daddy's really good at seeing when people need help. And I think Charlotte's really good at saying thank you in big ways. And I think they were supposed to find each other because now we're a family. Charlotte's hand tightened in Jacob's, and he saw tears streaming down her face. Grace Miller, Charlotte said, her voice breaking, you are wise beyond your years. I know, Grace said simply. Can I have more flan? They stayed for another hour, talking and laughing, and when they finally headed back to their own apartment, Grace was practically asleep on her feet. Jacob carried her the last flight of stairs, and Charlotte unlocked the door, moving through the space with the comfortable familiarity of home. After Grace was tucked in, Jacob found Charlotte on their small balcony, looking out at the city lights. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned into him with a contented sigh. What are you thinking about? He asked. How different my life is now. A year ago, I was working 18-hour days, coming home to an empty penthouse, convinced that success was enough, that I didn't need anything else. She turned in his arms. And then I got robbed and met you, and suddenly I realized I'd been living half a life. You had an incredibly successful life. I had an incredibly successful career, Charlotte corrected, but I didn't have this. I didn't have someone to come home to, someone to share victories and defeats with, someone who challenged me to be better. I didn't have Grace asking me to help with math homework or dragging me to soccer games. I didn't have a community. She gestured to the building around them. Mrs. Rodriguez, the family on the 4th floor, who always says good morning, the teenager downstairs who walks dogs. I know these people now. I'm part of something bigger than myself. You were always part of something bigger. Your company employs hundreds of people. Your philanthropy helps thousands. That's different. That's professional. This is personal. Charlotte cupped his face. This is real in a way nothing else has ever been real. Jacob kissed her, slow and deep, pouring everything he felt into it. When they broke apart, he kept his forehead pressed to hers. I have something for you, he said. Jacob, you are not supposed to give me gifts before the wedding. That's bad luck or something. Or, this isn't a wedding gift. This is something else. He pulled the small box from his pocket, and Charlotte's eyes widened. You already have a ring, she said, confused. I have your ring, the one you gave me when you proposed. But I wanted to give you something too,
something that represents all three of us. He opened the box and Charlotte gasped. Inside was a ring, white gold with 3 stones, a diamond in the center, flanked by 2 smaller stones in Grace's birthstone and Jacob's. The jeweler said it represents our family, Jacob explained. 3 stones, 3 people, all connected. And on the inside, Charlotte took the ring out with trembling fingers and read the inscription, Team Miller Lancaster. She started crying in earnest then, the kind of crying that came from joy so profound it had nowhere else to go. Grace helped me pick it out, Jacob continued. She insisted on the birthstones, said families should be represented in everything important. It's perfect. Charlotte slipped the ring on, and it fit perfectly. Jacob, this is the most beautiful thing anyone's ever given me. You gave me my life back. This is just a ring. This is everything. She kissed him again, and they stood on the balcony holding each other as the city hummed around them. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of final preparations. Grace took her maid of honor duties seriously, helping Charlotte pick flowers and taste-testing cake samples with the dedication of a professional critic. Jacob's co-workers threw him a bachelor party that was surprisingly tame, mostly involving dinner and stories about the early days when nobody had known if he'd work out. You proved us all wrong, the CFO said, raising his glass. Not about your abilities, Charlotte saw those from the start, but about fitting in. You made us better. Made us remember that credentials aren't character.
What 말씀하셨죠?
Outbands. Derek's trial had concluded months ago, but the changes Jacob had implemented remained. The company now had stronger oversight, better checks and balances, a culture that valued integrity over blind loyalty. Charlotte gave him full credit in board meetings, but Jacob knew the real credit belonged to both of them. Her for being willing to tear apart her company's practices to find the truth. Him for having the perspective to see what insiders had missed. The Thursday before the wedding, Jacob got a call from his old district manager at Savemore. Paul Hendrick's voice was stiff, formal. Jacob, I'm calling to apologize. The nephew confessed to everything. He's been charged with theft and fraud. I should have believed you. I'm sorry. Jacob sat in his office, processing this. An apology a year too late from a man who destroyed his life without a second thought. Thank you for telling me, Jacob said finally. For what it's worth, you were a good employee, one of the best. I was wrong to fire you. Yes, you were. Jacob felt no satisfaction in saying it, just a tired recognition of fact. But it worked out. I'm in a better place now. After he hung up, Charlotte appeared in his doorway. She'd developed an uncanny ability to know when he needed her. That was Paul Hendricks, Jacob said, calling to apologize. The nephew finally confessed. How do you feel? Vindicated. Angry that it took this long. Grateful it happened at all. He looked at her. Mostly grateful it happened at all, because if it hadn't, we would never have met. I've thought about that, Charlotte admitted, coming to sit beside him. About all the coincidences that had to happen for us to find each other. I had to go to that specific charity event. I had to step outside at that exact moment. I had to get robbed and thrown out near that particular bus stop. You had to be walking home at that time. You had to be the kind of person who stops to help strangers even when you can't afford to. That's a lot of coincidences. Or maybe it's fate, or the universe, or just dumb luck that happened to work out in our favor. She took his hand. I don't know what to call it. I just know I'm grateful. Me too. Saturday arrived with perfect spring weather, sunny but not too hot, with a light breeze that made the flowers in the botanical gardens dance. Jacob stood at the altar with his heart hammering, watching guests arrive. Mrs. Rodriguez in the front row, already crying. His co-workers from Lancaster and Associates, dressed in their finest. Charlotte's executive team, most of whom had become genuine friends. A few families from Grace's school, parents who'd watched their relationship develop over soccer games and class parties. Grace appeared first, walking down the aisle with the solemnity of someone entrusted with an important task. She wore a purple dress that she'd picked out herself, and she carried a basket of flower petals that she scattered with careful precision. When she reached the altar, she gave Jacob a thumbs up and whispered, "You look super fancy, Daddy." Then the music changed, and Charlotte appeared. She was breathtaking. Her dress was simple, elegant, nothing like the elaborate gowns Jacob had seen in wedding magazines. She'd told him she wanted to look like herself, not like a stranger, and she'd succeeded. Her hair was down, the way he loved it, and she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that Grace had helped pick. But what struck Jacob most was her smile. Pure, unguarded joy. She was walking toward him like he was everything she'd ever wanted, and the look in her eyes made his throat tight with emotion. Charlotte's best friend from college walked her down the aisle. Charlotte had no family to do it, and she'd chosen the woman who'd been there through building her company, through the hard years, through everything. When Charlotte reached him, she handed her bouquet to Grace and took both of Jacob's hands. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," he whispered back. The ceremony was short and personal. They'd written their own vows, and when it was Jacob's turn, he looked at Charlotte and felt like every word he'd prepared was inadequate. "A year ago, I was walking home in the dark, trying to figure out how to tell my daughter we might lose our apartment," he began. "I'd lost my job, lost my savings, lost hope. And then I saw you at that bus stop, and you were in trouble. And somehow helping you made me feel less hopeless. Like the world wasn't completely broken if people could still show up for each other." Charlotte's eyes were already wet with tears. "You came to my door the next morning and offered me a chance I didn't deserve. You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. And then you kept showing up to soccer games and school plays and Friday night pizzas. You loved my daughter like she was yours. You made me believe I could be more than what I'd been, do more than just survive." Jacob's voice cracked. "Charlotte, you gave me back my life, and then you gave me your heart. And I promised to spend the rest of my life being worthy of both." Charlotte was openly crying now, and half the guests were reaching for tissues. When it was her turn, Charlotte took a shaky breath and smiled through her tears. "Jacob, I've built a successful company. I've made millions of dollars. I've been featured in magazines and given speeches to thousands of people. And none of it, not one single accomplishment, made me feel as complete as the moment you gave me $20 you couldn't afford to give." She squeezed his hands. "You saw a stranger in trouble and you helped without hesitation, without wanting anything in return. That's who you are. That's who you've always been. And falling in love with you was the easiest thing I've ever done." She turned to Grace, who was watching with rapt attention. "Grace, I promise to love your father with everything I have. I promise to be there for you, to support you, to cheer at your soccer games until I lose my voice. I promise to help with math homework, even though I'm terrible at fractions. I promise to be the best stepmother I can be, to earn the trust you've given me, to never take for granted the gift of being part of your family." Grace was crying too, and Jacob pulled her into the moment, all three of them holding hands. "We're a team," Grace said, her voice carrying in the quiet garden. "The best team." "The best team," Charlotte and Jacob agreed. The officiant, smiling through her own tears, pronounced them married. Jacob kissed Charlotte with all the love and gratitude and hope he felt, and their guests erupted in applause. Grace jumped up and down, cheering, and somewhere in the back, Mrs. Rodriguez was crying so hard that her husband had to give her extra tissues. The reception was held in the gardens, with tables scattered under trees strung with lights. They'd kept it simple: good food, good music, good people. Charlotte's company had wanted to sponsor something elaborate, but she'd refused, insisting she wanted something personal, something that felt like them. During dinner, Charlotte's best friend gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying in equal measure. Charlotte once told me she didn't believe in soulmates. She believed in hard work and smart decisions and building something meaningful. Then she met Jacob and called me at 2 a.m. to say she'd been wrong about everything. That sometimes the universe just gives you a gift and the only smart decision is to accept it. Jacob's toast was simpler. He thanked everyone for coming, thanked Charlotte for choosing him, thanked Grace for being the best daughter and maid of honor anyone could ask for. He thanked Mrs. Rodriguez for her kindness when they'd needed it most. And he thanked his co-workers for giving him a chance to prove himself. "A year ago, I had nothing," he said, his voice steady. "Today, I have everything. And it started with $20 and a stranger who needed help. So my advice to all of you is this: when you see someone in trouble, help. You never know how it might change both your lives." The party continued into the evening, with dancing and laughter, and the kind of joy that came from people genuinely happy for the couple at the center of it all. Grace danced with everyone, her purple dress twirling, her face glowing with happiness. Charlotte danced with Jacob, their foreheads pressed together, swaying to music that felt like it was written just for them. "Are you happy?" Jacob asked.
Deliriously happy, stupidly happy. So happy I keep expecting to wake up and find out it was all a dream. Not a dream, real life, our real life. Our real life, Charlotte repeated, and kissed him. Later, as the party wound down and guests started to leave, Grace found them at their table. "This was the best wedding ever," she announced. "Can we do it again next year?" "That's not how marriage works, monkey," Jacob said, laughing. "Well, it should be, because this was awesome." Grace climbed into Charlotte's lap, suddenly tired after hours of excitement. "Are you officially my mom now?" Charlotte looked at Jacob, uncertain, and he nodded encouragingly. "I'm officially your stepmom," Charlotte said carefully, "which means I'm part of your family forever. But your mom—" She stopped, realizing the complication. "I don't remember my mom," Grace said matter-of-factly. "She died when I was a baby."
"Daddy has pictures and he tells me about her sometimes, but I don't remember, so maybe you could just be my mom? If that's okay?" Charlotte's face crumpled and she pulled Grace close. "That would be the greatest honor of my life." "Cool. So, Mom, can I have more cake?" Jacob watched his daughter extract a promise of cake from his new wife and felt his heart might actually burst from happiness. This moment, this family, this life. It was more than he'd ever imagined possible. The following Monday, life returned to a new normal. Jacob and Charlotte went to work together, coffee in hand, comfortable in their professional roles. Grace went to school and told everyone about the wedding, showing off pictures on Charlotte's phone. Mrs. Rodriguez started planning a neighborhood celebration, insisting that good news should be shared with everyone. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, the three of them around their small kitchen table, Grace made an announcement. "I told Mrs. Chen today that you're my mom now," she said to Charlotte. "And she said families come in all different shapes, and what matters is love. So I drew a picture of our family." She pulled out a piece of paper covered in crayon. 3 figures holding hands labeled Daddy, Mom, and me. Above them, in careful lettering, "The Miller Lancaster family, we are the best team." Charlotte took the picture with trembling hands. "Can I keep this?" "Yeah, I made it for you, to remember that you're really part of our family now." "I will treasure this forever." Charlotte carefully set it aside. "Thank you, Grace." After dinner, after Grace was in bed, Jacob and Charlotte stood in their small living room and looked at the picture now hanging on the refrigerator alongside all of Grace's other artwork. "We did it," Charlotte said. "We actually built this." "You sound surprised." "I am surprised. I spent so long thinking I was too damaged, too focused on work, too set in my ways to have something like this. And then you proved me wrong." "You proved yourself wrong," Jacob corrected. "I just gave you the opportunity." Charlotte turned to face him, and her expression was serious. "Jacob, I need to tell you something." His stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. The opposite." She took his hands. "I've been thinking about the foundation, the one I run for foster kids and domestic violence survivors. It's important work, but it's distant. I write checks, I attend galas, but I'm not really connected to it." "Okay. I want to change that. I want to create a program that actually helps people the way you helped me. Not just with money, but with opportunity. A program that identifies people who've been knocked down by circumstances beyond their control. People fired unfairly, people struggling with medical debt, single parents who need a chance, and gives them real jobs with real futures." Jacob stared at her. "That's ambitious." "I know, but I have the resources. And I have you. Someone who understands what it's like to need that kind of help, who can help design a program that actually works." She squeezed his hands. "I want to call it the Second Chances Initiative, and I want you to run it." "Charlotte, I already have a job I'm good at." "I know. And you'll keep that job. This would be an addition, maybe transitioning over time if you wanted. But Jacob, you have a gift for seeing people's potential, for understanding how systems fail them and how to build better ones. You could help hundreds of people, thousands eventually." Jacob thought about Paul Hendrick's apology, about Derek's conviction, about his own journey from desperate to secure. He thought about all the people still walking home in the cold, still getting fired for things they didn't do, still struggling to believe in their own worth. "I want to do it," he said, "but not just me. I want Grace involved too, when she's old enough. I want her to grow up understanding that privilege means responsibility, that having more means helping more." "Of course, this is a family project." Charlotte smiled. "We're a team, remember? The best team." They spent the next hour talking about logistics, about how to structure the program, about criteria and goals and impact metrics. Charlotte was in full CEO mode, strategic and focused, but she kept looking at Jacob with such love that he had to keep stopping to kiss her. "We should probably get some sleep," Charlotte said eventually. "Big day tomorrow. Board meeting at 9, and I need to present the Second Chances Initiative proposal." "You're presenting it already?" "I've been working on it for months. I was just waiting for the right moment to tell you." She grinned. "Plus, now I can tell the board that my brilliant husband is running it, which makes the whole thing more legitimate." "Using me for my credibility. I see how it is." "Using you for your everything," Charlotte corrected, and pulled him toward their bedroom. 3 months later, the Second Chances Initiative launched with a press conference that made national news. Charlotte stood at a podium, professional and poised, and told the story of meeting Jacob, the condensed, media-friendly version that hit all the emotional beats without getting too personal. "1 year ago, I met someone who'd been knocked down by circumstances beyond his control," she said. "Someone who'd lost his job unfairly, who was struggling to support his daughter, who had every reason to be bitter and angry. Instead, he was kind. He helped a stranger when he couldn't afford to help himself, and that act of kindness changed both our lives." She gestured to Jacob, who stood off to the side with Grace. He'd been reluctant to be part of the press conference, but Charlotte had insisted. "People need to see that you're real," she'd said, "that this program comes from lived experience, not corporate strategy." "Jacob Miller is now my husband and the director of the Second Chances Initiative," Charlotte continued. "This program will identify individuals who face systemic barriers, wrongful termination, medical debt, discriminatory hiring practices, and provide them with job training, placement services, and financial support to rebuild their lives. We're starting with a pilot program in Philadelphia, with plans to expand nationally within 2 years." The questions from reporters were predictable. How much was Lancaster and Associates investing? What were the selection criteria? How would they measure success? Jacob stepped up to the microphone for the last question. "Success isn't just about numbers," he said. "It's about giving people their dignity back. It's about creating opportunities for people society has written off. It's about remembering that everyone deserves a second chance." He paused. "A year ago, someone gave me a second chance. Now it's my turn to pay that forward." The program launched quietly at first, with a handful of participants carefully selected from applications that poured in by the thousands. Each story was heartbreaking. A single mother fired for missing work to care for a sick child, a veteran struggling with PTSD who couldn't hold down a job, a man wrongly convicted and later exonerated who couldn't find employment because of his record. Jacob worked with each participant personally, helping them navigate job placement, providing coaching and support, connecting them with resources. Charlotte provided the infrastructure and funding, but Jacob provided something more valuable, someone who understood, who'd been there, who could look them in the eye and say, "I know it feels impossible, but it's not." Within 6 months, the program had a 90% placement rate. Participants found jobs, rebuilt their lives, regained their hope. Some of them came back to volunteer, wanting to help others the way they'd been helped. The media loved it. The Second Chances Initiative became the feel-good story of the year, proof that corporate America could do good while doing well. Charlotte and Jacob were interviewed on morning shows, featured in magazines, held up as examples of how to use wealth and privilege responsibly. Through it all, they stayed grounded. They still lived in their modest apartment, though they could have afforded something much grander. Grace still went to public school, still played soccer on Saturday mornings, still had chores and homework and a very normal childhood. They still had Friday night pizza with Mrs. Rodriguez, still walked to the park on Sunday afternoons, still valued community over status. "Why don't we move to a bigger place?" Charlotte's friend asked one day over coffee. "You can afford it. Jacob's making good money now. It seems weird that you're still in that tiny apartment." Because that apartment is where we became a family, Charlotte said simply. Because our neighbors are our friends. Because Grace has roots there. Because bigger isn't always better. You've changed, her friend observed. A year ago, you would have bought the biggest penthouse you could find just to prove you could. A year ago, I didn't know what actually mattered, Charlotte smiled. Now I do. Grace's 9th birthday arrived in the fall, and they celebrated with the same chaotic party they'd had the year before. Community center, too much cake, kids running wild. But this year, Grace had a special request. Instead of presents, can people donate to the Second Chances thing? She asked. Emma's mom said her cousin needs help finding a job, and I thought maybe we could help more people if everyone gave money instead of toys. Jacob felt tears prick his eyes. Grace, it's your birthday. You should get presents. I have lots of stuff already, and helping people is better than more toys. She said it with the simple logic of childhood, like it was obvious. Plus, you always say we should share when we have enough, and we have lots of enough. The party raised over $5,000 for the Second Chances initiative, mostly in small donations from families who didn't have much to spare but wanted to contribute. Jacob watched parents who struggled themselves give $20 or $30, and he thought about his own $20 donation to Charlotte, how kindness multiplied, how generosity inspired more generosity. Your daughter is remarkable, Charlotte's CFO said at the party. He'd come with his grandkids, who were friends with Grace. She gets it, the responsibility that comes with privilege. Most adults never learn that. She has good teachers, Jacob said, watching Grace help a younger kid who'd fallen and scraped his knee. She has good parents, the CFO corrected. You and Charlotte are raising her right. That night, after the party, after the cleanup, after Grace was asleep, Jacob and Charlotte sat on their balcony and looked at the city. Do you ever think about that night? Charlotte asked. The bus stop? All the time. What do you think about? Jacob considered the question. I think about how scared I was, how hopeless everything felt, how giving you that money was probably the stupidest financial decision I could have made. He turned to her. And I think about how it was also the best decision I ever made, not because of what I got back, but because it reminded me who I wanted to be. Someone who helps, even when it's hard. Someone Grace could be proud of. She's so proud of you. You know that, right? I know. But I'm more proud of her. She's better than both of us. She's the best of both of us, Charlotte agreed. Your kindness and my stubbornness. Your intelligence and my humility. Your sense of humor and my, Charlotte stopped. Okay, I'm not funny. She definitely got the humor from you. They laughed, and Jacob pulled her close. A year and a half since that night at the bus stop, and sometimes it felt like a lifetime ago. Sometimes it felt like yesterday. I love our life, Charlotte said quietly. I love coming home to you and Grace. I love our tiny apartment and our Friday night pizzas and Grace's soccer games. I love working together on the initiative and watching people get their lives back. I love all of it. Even the part where Grace insists on pancakes every Sunday and I burn half of them? Especially that part. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights, and Jacob thought about Paul Hendricks' apology, about Derek in prison, about the hundreds of people the initiative had helped. He thought about all the ways life could have gone differently, if he'd walked past Charlotte that night, if she'd never tracked him down, if Grace hadn't accepted her so completely. But it had happened exactly as it was supposed to. Every piece falling into place, every choice leading to this moment. Jacob. Charlotte's voice was hesitant, which was unusual. She was rarely uncertain about anything. Yeah? I want to have a baby. Jacob's heart stopped, then started again, faster. A baby? I know we haven't talked about it. I know Grace is already a handful, and we're both busy with work, but I want to have a child with you. I want Grace to have a sibling. I want to build our family even bigger. She looked at him anxiously. Is that crazy? That's not crazy. That's... Jacob found himself smiling so wide his face hurt. That's perfect. That's everything. Really? Really? Charlotte, I would love nothing more than to have a baby with you. He kissed her, deep and certain. Grace is going to lose her mind with excitement. We should probably wait to tell her until we're actually pregnant. She'll want updates every single day. True. She's very impatient when she wants something. I wonder where she gets that from, Charlotte said dryly, and Jacob laughed. They went inside, and that night they started trying for a baby. And 3 months later, Charlotte took a test that came back positive. They told Grace on Christmas morning, giving her a gift box that contained a onesie that said, Big Sister. Grace stared at it for a long moment, processing. Then she started screaming with joy. I'm going to be a big sister. I'm going to teach them everything. Can we name it after a unicorn? When is it coming? How do you know it's in there? The questions came rapid fire, and Jacob and Charlotte answered as best they could, laughing at Grace's enthusiasm and already imagining their family of 4. The pregnancy was smooth, and Charlotte worked until her due date, refusing to slow down despite everyone's concern. The baby, a boy they named Daniel, after Jacob's father, arrived on a sunny morning in September, healthy and loud and absolutely perfect. Grace held her baby brother with the seriousness of someone entrusted with precious cargo. Hi, Daniel, she whispered. I'm your big sister. I'm going to protect you and teach you about soccer and make sure nobody's mean to you ever. Jacob watched his daughter with his son, and his wife smiling at both of them, and felt like his heart might actually explode from happiness. They brought Daniel home to the same small apartment, which now felt genuinely cramped with 4 people. Charlotte started seriously looking at houses, and they found one in their same neighborhood, a 3-bedroom with a yard big enough for soccer practice and a porch where they could all sit together. Mrs. Rodriguez cried when they told her they were moving, then cried harder when they said it was only 6 blocks away. You're not getting rid of me that easily, Jacob assured her. We still need you for tamales and wisdom and babysitting when we're desperate. I'll be there, Mrs. Rodriguez promised. Always. The years that followed were full and chaotic and wonderful. Grace grew into a confident teenager who played competitive soccer and volunteered with the Second Chances Initiative, interviewing applicants with her father and helping design youth programs. Daniel grew into a curious, energetic little boy who followed his sister everywhere and asked approximately 1 million questions a day. The Second Chances Initiative expanded nationally, then internationally, helping thousands of people rebuild their lives. Jacob became a recognized expert on employment equity and second chance hiring, speaking at conferences and consulting with companies about better practices. Charlotte's company continued to thrive, but she'd restructured her priorities, leaving work at reasonable hours, attending every school play and soccer game, making sure her family came first. They stayed in their neighborhood, active in the community, never forgetting where they'd come from. Every year on the anniversary of the night they met, they volunteered at the local homeless shelter, serving meals and listening to stories, remembering that everyone deserves dignity and help. Grace graduated high school with honors and a full scholarship to college, where she planned to study social work. At her graduation party, she gave a speech that made everyone cry. My parents taught me that what you have isn't as important as what you do with it, she said. My dad gave away his last $20 when we had nothing, and it changed our whole lives. Not because of what he got back, but because of who he chose to be. Someone who helps, someone who sees people, someone who believes in second chances. She looked at Jacob and Charlotte in the crowd. I want to be like that. I want to help people the way you've helped people. I want to build a world where everyone gets the chances they deserve. The applause was thunderous, and Jacob felt Charlotte's hand in his, felt Daniel's weight as his son leaned against him, and thought about how far they'd all come. That night, after everyone had left, the 4 of them sat on their porch. Grace was heading to college in the fall. Daniel was starting middle school. Charlotte and Jacob had been married for 9 years. Their hair had more gray, their faces had more lines, but their love had only deepened. Do you ever regret it? Grace asked suddenly. Giving away that money? Changing your whole life? Jacob thought about the question seriously. No, because that night taught me something important. That who you are when you have nothing is who you really are. And I wanted to be someone you could be proud of. I've always been proud of you, Daddy. Grace's voice was thick with emotion. Even when we had nothing, especially then. Me too, Daniel chimed in. You're the best daddy. Charlotte squeezed Jacob's hand. The very best. They sat together as the sun set, 4 people bound by love and choice and the daily decision to show up for each other. Jacob thought about that night at the bus stop, about the scared, desperate man he'd been, about the impossible journey that had led him here. He'd given away $20 when he couldn't afford to give 20 cents. And in return, he'd received everything that mattered: love, family, purpose, and the knowledge that kindness was never wasted, that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion could transform entire lives. As the stars came out over Philadelphia, Jacob Miller looked at his family and knew with absolute certainty that he was the luckiest man alive. Not because of money or success or recognition, but because he'd learned what really mattered. And what really mattered was right here, on this porch, in this moment: his family, his team, his whole world. And it had all started with $20 and the choice to help a stranger. The best $20 he'd ever spent.